way there. Oh, reviewing Hellraiser. We're 5 films down out of 10, and in this episode we're going to cover another 3. Hellseeker, Deader and Hellworld, aka the Rick Bota trilogy. A man who has worked on as many entries as Clive Barker himself and is widely thought to have spoilt the franchise. As per usual, I'm joined by my co-hosts for this miniseries, Mr. Alasdair and Jim Lamming. Say hi, guys.
Hiya. Hi there.
But before we go back into the grim world of straight-to-video sequels, let's have a wee discussion about what else we've been watching. Potentially these are better offerings than Hellraiser Parts 6 to 8. So Al, I'm going to start off with yourself. What have you been watching lately?
I've actually been rewatching some of the Grudge films, because sometimes you just hold a grudge and you want to watch that unfold on screen. And it's some J-horror, as they call it. And I would say, I watched the American remakes, by the way, with Sarah Michelle Gellar, which I think are inferior remakes to The Ring. I think that got a better transition to Western audiences than The Grudge did, but I still quite enjoyed it. It was good.
I think definitely the first Ring did. I think the first Ring was a really good example of how you update the lore to make it something that's more American, but at the same time still keep the scary aspects of the story. With The Grudge, I'm not so sure, because they kind of kept a lot of the same issues the original film had, like the really confusing timelines and the kind of episodic approach, right? It's almost like an anthology film.
That's I think the most recent one. I found the original Grudge to be far more streamlined story-wise, but it does do a lot of sort of flashbacks to, I could say, possibly almost a confusing degree, because most films will have flashbacks, but if there's multiple flashbacks, they themselves are usually kept in chronological order. But then at the very end, there's a sort of strange dream sequence where Sarah Michelle Gellar's walked into a room and she sees the ghost, and the ghost walks about, but then it's a flashback within a flashback to before all of the previous flashbacks. So it's, on the one hand, it's a film that makes you, what with the groaning and the creaky, the little boy who makes the cat noises and the groaning girl, they make you want to hide behind the sofa. However, the plot details that you need to understand what's going on obviously need the audience attention. So it's the tug of war.
I sort of thought that the sort of puzzle box approach almost attracted a little bit from the scariness, because particularly, and I think it was the second Japanese one, which is just really impenetrable as a story. You're like, okay, this is sort of scary, but I don't know who these characters are.
Yeah, if you lose track of who's who, then the scare factor isn't quite there, because the audience do need to invest in the characters. And I feel that we're going to sort of touch on this topic later on in tonight's podcast for some reason.
Oh, potential spoilers. What else have you been watching?
That's actually been it. Just a quick trip down Grudge Lane. That's, if I can phrase it that way. But it was quite fun. I enjoyed it.
Jim, are you a fan of the Grudge films at all?
I've seen the remake with Sarah Michelle Gellar in it. It was all right. There's nothing I can really add to that. I did go to see the more recent version at the cinema. All I can say about that is that it looked good.
Yeah, it's the same director as the Eyes of My Mother, which was a kind of all style, no substance art house horror. And so when I saw that he was attached to The Grudge, I thought, okay, well, maybe if a mainstream property will get something pretty cool. But no, I took one for the team, watched it, and gave it 1.5 stars. In fact, Al, I think you were beside me while we watched it. One of those very few films where the audience were talking and I didn't like it enough to tell them to shut the fuck up.
Oh, I didn't like it. That film broke its own rules, because this is a continuation or a reboot, a remake, sequel sort of creature where you can attach multiple different titles to it, but the opening prologue connected it to the original American remake Grudge films. But in this one, we go back to America and other characters die. But now there's a reason how the ghosts are the way they are in the original films. The boy makes the cat noises. The boy and the cat were drowned in the bathtub. The wife had her neck broken, so she makes that gurgling, growling, creepy noise. That's why those ghosts are the way they are. That makes sense. The most latest film does not follow that at all. That just any ghost makes the creepy gurgly effect just because it's creepy. And that, throughout the whole film, that just annoyed me.
Yeah, and it's not clear where it sits in relation to him either by acknowledging the previous ones, but then having ghosts that are not the same ghost, but have exactly the same, like...
Powers, yeah.
Yeah, same powers, the same iconography attached to them.
Yeah, are these ghosts, if someone travels to America and comes back, and, like, does that mean that if they die unexpectedly, their spirit's going to have the Japanese supernatural powers?
This lack of series continuity we might be talking about later on as well. Big spoilers.
Possibly.
I've actually recently rewatched the American version of The Ring and also the Japanese one. And you know, I've said this many times, I prefer the American one. I find the mythology, the kind of lore of it a bit more interesting, with Samara and her abuse at the hands of her parents. Is this kind of got more of a visceral impact than the ESP sort of telekinesis storyline did for me. That being said, like the Japanese one, you can't mess with the locations in that. You know, like rural Japan just looks stunning. There's a really good atmosphere to the whole film, and it's an absolute classic for a reason. But for me, the American one just beats it. I think also part of the American one, what really helps with it is the ending, where you could totally believe that that's the end of a Western film when, you know, she's down in the well. She's like, oh yeah, helping the ghost. And then her son's all like, what? You weren't supposed to help her, Rachel? And you're like, oh, hairs on end. Loved it.
That was a brilliant moment in the film. I mean, it's the obvious moment with the television, but that the son saying that was fantastic. I loved it.
Absolutely pulling the rug out from beneath you. Jim, are you a fan of the Ring films at all?
Yeah, I actually got the box set of the Japanese ones a few months back. It's one of those pretty similar to The Matrix in terms of it being that ingrained in popular culture. I was pretty certain I'd seen it, but you know, it turned out I hadn't, and so that was pretty good to go through those quite recently.
What do you think of the sequels?
Definitely decline in quality as they go along. There was actually 2 sequels to the first Ring film. One was called Spiral, which released simultaneously, and then you had the Ring 2, which was released after the popularity of the original. But I think I actually enjoyed Spiral a bit more than Ring 2.
If you liked Spiral, you'd absolutely love the book of Spiral, because for me, Spiral's the most interesting of the books, but it's the one that doesn't really lend itself to a movie. You don't really have big set-piece moments. It's not got such a sense of threat about it. And by the way, it's funny you should mention The Matrix, because one of the later novels has a very similar concept to The Matrix. So, yeah, it's worth checking them out. They get increasingly science fiction. And what did you make of Ring Zero?
It was interesting. You got to give it that. They did try to go down a bit of a different route with than the other films, but again, it was not entirely great. I mean, it was interesting. They tried to add a bit of lore to, her origins, and so Sadako's origins. But I think that the way it escalated was probably just a bit too melodramatic. All of the films I enjoyed. The style, as you said, the settings, rural Japan was just beautiful. Like the way it was filmed, how it was shot was all fantastic. But yeah, they do decline in quality over. The prequel is a an interesting watch, and if you're really into the other films, definitely give it a go. But yeah, it feels separate to the other Ring films. It doesn't feel like it belongs.
Maybe it's like the Sadako of these films, it doesn't quite fit in with all the others. We sort of love it for that reason. What else have you been watching except for these Ring films?
I was just going to fit in there. A fun little fact is that Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays the professor, the college teacher in the Japanese Ring films, is actually my most watched actor of this year so far. Well, joint most watched with 8 films, including the new Mortal Kombat one. For some reason, Rush Hour 3, Army of the Dead, Sunshine, Life. But can you guess who my joint most watched actor is next to him?
Ooh, so I reckon it's probably going to be someone who's appeared in some of the Marvel ones.
I think you should be guessing a bit closer to home.
Oh, hang on. What are we talking? We talking about Don Bradley here?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, I've not really had a lot of time between the previous podcast and this one to watch anything, but I did manage to fit in the new director's cut of Rocky IV. It feels like a different film, yet feels like exactly the same film. They've managed to add a bit more of a dramatic weight to it. There's a lot more with Apollo Creed, a lot more with Adrian, more dialogue, a lot more drama. Yet I wouldn't say it was any better or any worse than what we already had. In fact, I think that the montages in the director's cut are longer. So getting away from that whole MTV excessive style is not so much the case here, because I'm pretty certain that we did get some extra footage, and those songs did go on a bit longer than I remember them doing.
See, I'd have actually thought that he'd go the other way, because if you're trying to add lots of extra drama and make a more serious movie, but having Hearts on Fire and No Easy Way Out as of over total bangers, they sort of make a film seem stupid.
You know what? Like it didn't feel out of place. Like a lot of what was in the original Rocky IV was cut out, and left out and replaced by these newer alternative scenes. So it wasn't any longer. It was just structured slightly different. I think even the James Brown bit had a bit more to it as well. Definitely a lot more different angles, different character reactions, that sort of thing. And Bridget Nielsen's character, she had a lot less dialogue, but seemed to appear on the screen a lot more at the same time, which was very odd.
Oh, cutting his ex-wife's material. What a dick.
But yeah, overall, I would rate it exactly as I would the original version of Rocky IV. It's a great film, guilty pleasure, always good fun. Although I will add that the fight at the end of the film does seem to have more of a story to it, rather than it's just those two fighting. It does seem to have been cut in a way that you can tell that Sylvester Stallone's improving as he goes along, whereas Dolph Lundgren is starting to get worried, realizes, oh wait, I am mortal. And you can just see it in their faces, like they themselves tell that story as opposed to the actual physicality of it. So that was a pretty neat touch to it as well. And speaking of Mortal, I actually watched the Paul Anderson version of Mortal Kombat in the last week as well. I don't know why. But, another guilty pleasure, much like Rocky IV. It's pretty terrible, but I enjoyed it all the same.
Guilty pleasures are the best.
Absolutely. Comfort blankets, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
I believe you were recently playing Resident Evil Village.
Yes, absolutely. Right? I finally put it on sale. So, now is the time to give it a go.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I'm not going to pay 45 quid for a game I'll complete in 6 hours.
Yeah, I guess by modern standards, a lot of games do have a good 40-hour lifespan on them. So Resident Evil Village was one I'd, ummed and ahed about, but yeah, the sale definitely helped with that. And I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a short game, but, what goes on is fantastic. It looks great. And it just happened to be snowing at the same time that I was playing it, so that added a nice extra layer of depth to it for me. So, I remember when the game was, we'd seen the announcements and then it had been released, and all of it was basically memes about Lady Dimitrescu. And for someone who had not seen any more than that, you would just assume that the entire game was based around that, but it was actually surprising how much more there is to it and how better it was, really, from what I was expecting. But yeah, playing it on the Series X, it looked fantastic, and I had a great time. And it's probably my favorite mainline Resident Evil game for a good few years, not including the remakes, as I've really enjoyed those as well. But yeah, definitely, I would say probably the best Resident Evil in a good 10 years or so.
I personally preferred the 7th one, I think. Yeah, people can hear me and Emma's review of it. It's the same episode with Spirals, and was that episode 7 or something? Who knows? Anyway, I definitely enjoyed this one, and I thought like it was really varied, but something it lacked for me was the same kind of suspense that we got out of Part 7. I played the PS5 game recently. I was playing the director's cut of Ghost of Tsushima. Finally completed it after 50 solid hours or so. And you know, the thing is, it's a bit like a Quiet Place 2 earlier this year, where it's a game that does everything well, right? It looks excellent, it handles really well, the combat system's dead novel, but for some reason, it's just difficult to love it.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit like having anxiety at a party. You're hanging around going, like, this should be fun, but I'm not really enjoying myself. And I'm not sure what it is. I think it's just because it felt a bit like Assassin's Creed with a different setting or something. Like, it felt like a game I played before.
I'm with you on that. It's the scale of it is huge, but when some of the missions are go and find this tiny object from the other side of the map, it does get a bit much. I mean, I loved riding my horse through the Japanese countryside, all the different environments, the colors, all looked fantastic, but it does get a bit much when you're going from one side to the other, and everything kind of gets a bit diluted. So a lot of the action can be fantastic. The cutscenes are amazing, but it does seem that you do have too much of a good thing with this one. And one of the main problems for me, I did actually review it for the website, but the PlayStation 4, which I played it on, running this game sounds like 25 hairdryers stuck together or going off at the same time. It's horrible.
This is our reason for upgrading to PS5. Our PS4 just couldn't handle most games. It would just start going like, in fact, most Blu-rays would have it going to a little frenzy. It's just time for an upgrade.
I love your car sound effect. That was brilliant.
Al, you've been playing any video games lately?
No, recently, actually. There's one that I'm wanting to have a go at called Limbo. I think it's a very back to basics platformer, but I think it's got a great atmosphere look to it from what I've seen. Sort of everything's like the color, there is no color scheme, everything's just black and white, and you're playing almost a stick figure that's trying to run through a very dangerous land with giant spiders and an abandoned warehouse and everything that comes after you. It's a difficult one to describe. I would actually recommend people go have a look at Limbo. Looks very atmospheric and a lot of problem solving, but it's just got a very scary atmosphere.
It's very good, but also very bleak as well.
Yeah, bleak's the word.
Well, folks, I'm going to tell you what I've been watching lately. Listeners are maybe going, hey, we're spending longer than usual in this segment. Can't think why, with Hellraiser 628 to talk about. This bit's going to take up half the show. We'll just go, what do you think of that? I watched something because of this show, and that is Spencer, which Jim mentioned in the last episode. And oh my God, I thought this was great. It's genuinely harrowing. It's got really good presentation, and there's some dead emotional bits, particularly one involving a car. And that is not what you would think from a biography film of Princess Diana. The one thing I didn't like about this was the Anne Boleyn parallel just felt a little bit flat and sort of took away the agency that the character struggles with throughout the course of the movie. Yeah, in an age where people still get a hard-on over the royal family, I kind of admire the absolute audacity of the filmmakers to make this comparison in the first place. Is it horror? Sort of. I certainly wouldn't correct anyone who says it is, and it does have some of the scariest sequences I've seen in the cinema for quite some time, just as sort of eeriness and the gaslighting element that we do see in a lot of horror movies, whether it's things like, Rosemary's Baby, which we've reviewed for this website, stuff like The Invisible Man. And we do have a lot of the kind of gothic imagery, particularly concerning her old house. So, yeah, Spencer, really, really liked it. Thanks for the recommendation, Jim.
No worries, yeah. And what you've said is pretty much bang on. The Anne Boleyn stuff was a bit on the nose, really, wasn't it? It kind of steered towards horror, maybe a ghost story, but didn't quite fulfill that promise, did it?
I'm not sure that I like Kristen Stewart appearing in it. She seems like she's got some good acting chops in general, particularly after Twilight. Like, she's done some much more adventurous projects since then, but at the same time, I didn't think that she had the natural charisma to pull off the part. She is playing a passive character for the whole thing, and sometimes it's difficult to kind of infuse a an element of likability about a character who's mostly just doing what she's told for half the film. But at the same time, she just didn't quite land it for me.
Personally, I thought she carried it really well. I enjoyed it. And yeah, I think everything I've seen her in, especially recently, has been really good. Even Charlie's Angels, I enjoyed that one as well.
Her wigs were on point.
Absolutely. Stylistically, it's brilliant. Like as I said last time, you can tell what era it's set in just by looking at a single frame of that film.
Other things I saw, I watched a classic horror story streaming now on Netflix. It's an intriguing enough premise, and you've got some pretty interesting lore to it. It's an Italian film, by the way, if anyone's wondering. It does take a wee while to find its rhythm, but once it takes an unexpected turn, it commits to it in some really clever ways. However, there's a bit of a kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach to writing, and I think that works against it. It also borrows from a lot of very big movies. I'm not going to mention them here because it'd be huge spoilers, but that kind of detracted from it. There's a familiarity about it, and there's also a bit of a smug tone, which I'm not going to explain here either because that would give away a heck of a lot of spoilers. But good, unlikely to make many end-of-year lists. I know 2021 has not been the best year, but I don't think this will feature many lists. Still, if you've got 90 Minutes to Kill, worth a watch. And finally, you guys ever see a trailer for Wild Mountain Thyme?
No, I haven't actually.
Me neither.
Right. Wild Mountain Thyme is not a genre film, so I normally wouldn't talk about here, but man, this is The Room level bad. I shit you not. But unlike The Room, you've got a really good cast. You have John Hamm, you've got Emily Blunt, you've got Christopher Walken, you've got that guy from 50 Shades of Grey. Fuck knows why all of them signed up to this. It's a dull, meandering, pastoral romance that's got this will they, won't they angle running all the way through it, but the audience aren't going to care. Nobody except for the actor's parents is going to be particularly invested. However, what I would say is this is genuinely is partially redeemed by having the most insane plot twist I've seen in years. Honestly, it's worth watching just to learn why the two of them aren't together yet. The guy gives us reason. Oh God, it's funny as hell.
I have to say that, as you're saying, this is not a genre film, yet you're comparing it to The Room. I mean, that is, in its own way, horror.
Like The Room, I believe this is a completely sincere attempt to make a film, and that's just what makes it even stranger.
Oh, dear.
Because, you know, when you've got those sort of so bad it's good movies, like, you know, Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus and all these sorts of things, right? And what I think makes The Room just work is that The Room was never trying to be so bad it's good. Like,
I think the Room, you had a man that was trying to sincerely tell a story, but he had neither the skill, the talent, or the effort. I mean, he, by all accounts, half-assed the whole thing. He funded the whole thing himself, as I think we all know, and he basically bought his dream by, you know, skipping the whole process of earning rewards. He just bought it.
Something I was wondering from the biography by Greg Sestero, his autobiography, Disaster Artist, you've got two sides of Tommy as an artist here because, yeah, on one hand, it looks like it's absolutely effortless, don't get me wrong. On the other, though, he paints this picture of a guy who maybe conflates a kind of rough and ready approach to raw talent. Like, he does a draft and goes, that'll do, you know, or does a draft and is so assured of how honest and vulnerable he's being with his writing that he doesn't really need to go back and change it.
Yeah, I think you and I say that because I know that we've both watched on YouTube. There was a read-through of the script of The Room, and it was the original script before it got changed for the actual film. And holy God in heaven, there is some awfulness in that original script. And it's to the point where one of the actor that's actually doing the Johnny Wiseau impression, he says, he does the whole "you're tearing me apart, Lisa," but then the actress that was playing Lisa elbows him, because they have a self-imposed rule. You have to say it as it's written, including the punctuation. So we get the laughs of, "I'm Ron Burgundy." And there's a point where the line was actually written originally, "You're taking me apart, Lisa." Just not quite got the same punch.
That's right. Ah, God, at some point in the future, let's do one of these about the room. But not today, folks, because we are doing Hellraisers parts 6 to 8. Guys, I can't fucking wait to get talking about Hellseeker.
Welcome to the worst nightmare of all. Reality. Which do you find more exhilarating?
It's getting hot in here.
The pleasure.
It's perfect.
I prefer pain.
Hellseeker! This is the 6th Hellraiser film, and there's a bit of controversy as to whether this began life as a Hellraiser film or not. Co-writer Tim Day has assured people it did begin life as a Hellraiser script and that Clive Barker liked it. The thing is, I've seen absolutely no record of Clive Barker saying this anywhere, and it does make me wonder, does this really seem like a Hellraiser film to you, Alasdair?
Obviously, I'm going to say no, because it isn't. This is your patchwork style storytelling where we've got a script. It's not the one that we want, but it's the one that we've got, and we're going to slap on a whole bits of pieces onto this to make it, quote unquote, work. So we're going to get in the Cenobites, we're going to get in the box, we've got to get in Kirsty. But let's say if you removed from this story absolutely everything that was Hellraiser based, you've essentially got a remake, a very loose remake of Jacob's Ladder, fundamentally. So I would say, on the basis that it's much more a Jacob's Ladder remake than any kind of Hellraiser film, I don't believe this started as a Hellraiser film, just based on the empirical evidence that the film presents.
Could you not also argue that potentially Rick Bota, or whoever wrote this, was watching Hellraiser Inferno and then went, hey, why don't we do a film just like this?
Well, I might as well say this now. I've got a view on this trilogy of Rick Bota films where because I said this in my last review when we talked about Hellraiser 5, and I said after 4, where do you go? And I did say that Hellraiser 5 was a breath of fresh air because it changed, it redefined what a Hellraiser movie could be. And unfortunately, that sort of got ran into the ground with the next 3 movies being remakes of 5, essentially, because they do a different angle with 5, they take a different route. And I mean, I would defy anyone to say that angle and that route was not also repeated in 6, 7, and 8. But when you look at the scripts, because there's certainly analogies to what 6, 7, and 8 could have been as other films. And I might talk about all 3 of them as one here very quickly, whereas I think if you remove all the Hellraiser aspects of them, again, you've still got a movie that functions. It's just not a Hellraiser movie. But slapping Hellraiser padding onto these films, plural, didn't quite make them Hellraiser films either.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like, there's a bit of a beginning where we're getting the intro, you've got your cheesy guitar music, but then you've got the box turning around slowly to say, ooh, this is Hellraiser. And yet, at the same time, the Hellraiser elements kind of bookend the movie, right? Because you mentioned Kirsty. It was good seeing Kirsty again.
Yeah, it was.
However, it was a bit like Zendaya in Dune, where when we see her, she's just walking very slowly and gets some dialogue at the last part.
Kirsty was, I think they just took some footage of Ashley Lawrence doing a Chanel advert or something, because there's so little of her in the film. And I've got legacy issues with this film as well. I mean, it's great for them having a shout. I mean, when you say the words Uncle and Frank together, you're like, oh, that reminds me of a much better film. But with Kirsty being so underutilized, and in the way that she is utilized as well, she is actually mishandled very badly. So, I mean, we might as well address this now. She's gone from a heroine who wants to save the life of her friends and family in films 1 and 2 to the world has kind of screwed her over, so she wants to get revenge, petty revenge on, well, petty, I mean, there is a murder plot going on in this film as well, but she's trying to get revenge on her husband, the guy that her husband randomly decided to make the deal with and all of the women that her husband's cheating with, which is a lot, by the way.
And she doesn't just kill them either. She tortures them. You know, we see the photos from the crime scenes. You're like, Kirsty, you didn't do this by halves.
Yeah, well, I mean, she had the Cenobites as teachers. I mean, you know.
This bit with the guy's mate absolutely bamboozles me. You go, okay, he's taking all the personal costs since his wife's dying. He's taking all the risks since he's the one killing his wife. And yet, why the hell does he decide to give him some money?
50% of the money as well.
50% of the money for something that's all him. It'd be like if I said to you guys, right, guys, I'm thinking to kill my wife, and you go, and I go, but I tell you what, I'll give you guys a third of the money each, right? And you go, what? Why? You're the one who's going to do all this. And the way that his plan is, I'm going to get this box that opens a gateway to hell, and they'll make her open it. And you're like, well, why not just drive her off a bridge like what we think the plan is?
I mean, they never established that Trevor actually knows what the box is or how it functions. Now, obviously, Kirsty clearly does know how it works and functions. But then, like, she opens it out of spite.
Are we meant to think that she told him, maybe? That's the only way I can make this make sense in my head, is she goes, tell you what, it's this magic box, and they did a right old number on me when I was younger. Then he goes, oh yeah, I've just been offered this magic box by a homeless guy. I think I'm going to use this as a weapon. That's the only way I can make it make sense.
Look, the flashbacks with Kirsty, like in the car, at the dinner table, and in, I believe it's the marital bed, those flashbacks, you catch snippets of them, but not enough. It's like trying to eavesdrop on a conversation while someone's punching you in the head.
Okay, Jim, what did you think of this movie?
Yeah, Kirsty was wasted. You're bringing back the protagonist from the first two films, so that's going to carry some weight for a start. And then you go and do that. It's really fragmented. Like you've already said, it's very similar to the previous film, Inferno. The first 20 minutes or so really frustrated me. Like you've got this guy who there's no idea what's going on. Like we think he's maybe got some sort of amnesia from the car accident, and then just interspersed with some random, shocking, gory bits. It didn't land. And it didn't help that, again, like Inferno, the protagonist isn't very likable. Yeah, there's a bit more sympathy there because, you know, he's, as far as we're concerned at this point, he's been in an accident. His wife's missing. There's no body. And, you know, there's that the Cenobites are somehow involved. It's a Hellraiser film, so you know there's some supernatural element to all this, but we're still in this mystery bit. So like the first half an hour, 20 minutes. And yeah, there is a bit of sympathy there, but he is generally not a likable guy. The more we're flashing back, the more we can see he was, you know, promiscuous. He wasn't faithful, and he was a bit of a shit. That being said, this film flew by for me. I can't dislike it. Again, much like Inferno, again, referring back to that, I mean, this may as well be a remake of it. Only, I guess he's a little bit more likable. For a start, he's not a cop. He's in, I don't know, he works in the business office doing business statistics and other ambitious.
Yeah.
I think we've had some trouble trying to work out what his job actually is. Crunch the numbers. Any numbers will do.
It involves numbers, suits, and reports. And that's what we get from it.
And an affair with his boss.
She's like trying to like sexually assault him just after his wife's died. I was like,
and he does say, "My wife has just died," and it's like they're coming back from a weekend trip. Like his wife died 7 p.m. Sunday afternoon, and he's in work first thing the next day. And I remember what you were saying about Inferno, Jim, where we have an unlikable protagonist. Well, let's call him an antagonist, if you will. And we're following that story, and he's horrible. We just actually want to see him suffer. So we do side with the Cenobites on this one. And at that time, I didn't say anything, but I thought, I wonder how he takes the protagonist of Hellraiser 6, who's also unlikable. But I think the difference between Hellraiser 5 and 6 is that Hellraiser 5 told a much more succinct story, even though most of it is in dream sequence. We knew the main character was a bad guy right from the get-go because he had these internal monologues where he said so himself. This guy, it's gradually revealed that he might be a bit of a dick. Oh, he is a bit of a dick. Oh, he's even a bigger bit of a dick. And it's just, he's like all the layers down in his character. It's just nothing but dicks. I might need to rephrase that slightly, but you know what I'm trying to say. He's an absolute terrible person. And I have to say, I mean, how many hours are there in the day? He's having an affair with at least 3 women and married.
Oh, yeah, because he's got the two different neighbours. One who flirts with him about his dead wife, going, yeah, you're lacking the female touch nowadays. You're like, what? His wife just died. You got the boss. You have the misuse as well. They've got his wife. This guy is getting sex constantly in this movie.
You know, I wrote down in my notes that every woman in a 5-mile radius seems to have a massive wide for this guy. And it's never made clear why. So I think there's maybe an aspect of male fantasy in the script here of a guy just having, I mean, I don't know if the women really fulfill different archetypes. You get the sort of dominatrix boss, the sort of masseuse who has a mothering, loving touch, and then you get the young, rebellious girl who lives next door. So, I mean, all the affairs that he has, they are very sort of different in that aspect. And how he's, I mean, do these women all know about each other? They at least all know that he is/was married, and they were fine with it. And it's not realistic. If you know what I mean? It's clearly, if you're having, I mean, how much time do you have to put aside for an affair? for 3?
But he picks neighbours and a boss, mate. This is intelligent design.
I mean,
well, there's that, I
see where you're
suppose.
coming from with that. And I did note that it felt like a lot of this film, every scene was a slight variation on the same thing we constantly seeing happening over and over again.
Yeah,
and as we finally get to the big reveal and twists at the end, we find out this guy's been living through a hell that Pinhead's putting him through. So obviously all of this suggestiveness that the encounters he's having, these are all part of his own personal hell, because you noticed how every time the protagonist gets in an uncomfortable situation, he will wake up somewhere else, regardless of what it is.
I need to jump in here because what I did was on my watch through, my most recent watch of Hellraiser 6, I counted the amount of times that Trevor wakes up. 13. 13 times he wakes up, and quite a few of them are in very close proximity to each other. It's very tiresome because you stop trusting that what you're watching is real or will have any real impact on the story.
Oh, agreed. There's absolutely no dramatic stakes once you get that pattern.
Yeah, and you get to the end with Pinhead and you have effectively neutralized all dramatic tension by that point. And the 13, that's so many. I want to make a quick deviation here to the Nicolas Cage remake of The Wicker Man. And there's one of the funniest wake-ups in that I've ever seen. He's trapped on the island, plane comes down, he runs down to the jetty, but then he sees the pilot's dead, and I think it's his daughter that's trapped under the jetty, between the wood planks. He sees her, but then he wakes up, but it's a false scare because then he wakes up again and goes, oh, God damn it. But at that point, if he wakes up twice and he's on the jetty, that would imply that if he fell asleep, he did actually see the plane come into land, which means he ran down to the jetty to meet the plane and then fell asleep.
We have a similar thing here. Do you know Alison, the doctor? We find out at the end that she's a real person, but Trevor wouldn't have met her yet. So you're like, oh, fuck, how has he got some sort of psychic link to the real world here? He's able to see the real doctor who speaks to Kirsty. I wonder if that was Bota's intention of doing another subversion, or if it was just they're running out of casting crew.
I actually liked that little bit at the end. It reminded me of a few of the more supernatural films of the 80s that I can remember, even Beetlejuice, because you've got Trevor's cadaver lying on the stretcher. And all of these characters that are working for the coroner, the police, the recovery unit, all of that, these are all characters that have appeared throughout the film. So perhaps it's his soul or his consciousness slowly slipping away, but taking fragments of these people that have recovered him from the river. And I thought that was a neat little touch at the end. It resonated with me for some reason, but it was a nice little beat.
I'd say the movie's not, it is certainly not completely without merit. And maybe just to continue on that thread, I'll talk about some of the good parts of the film that I did actually quite enjoy. This will be a trait throughout the 7th and 8th films as well with Rick Bota, where in discussions with David, I was told that he was actually a music video director, and like that was like the key I needed. That's like, I get it now. That's how he can direct some effective sequences in amongst what is often quite superfluous padding to these films, because quite a few of them are like 45-minute episodes stretched out into feature-length movies. With Hellraiser 6, Hellseeker, we've got a sequence where the boss comes round to his flat and she's, doing her dominatrix thing on him, but then he tells her to leave, and she does. Yet the camera's set up, and the camera is hooked up to the television.
Yes.
And he sees himself and her on the television, waves his hand in front of the camera, and sees the camera captures the image of his hand. So the camera's filming something live, it's live action, but he's seeing something on the screen that's not happening in real life because the camera looks to the chair and it's empty. That, I think, was a very effective sequence. I really did enjoy that. 2 Cenobites, of course, turn up that we've never seen before. And I think this is really, with Hellraiser 5 as well, the start of, we're going to make up different Cenobites for each movie. So we get two new ones. I think one of them is called the Surgeon. There's the one in the head brace that's got metal ocular things covering the eyes, but that sequence, I really did enjoy that bit. That was effective.
There was a few neat little touches like that throughout, I think. I mean, out of all of these, I think this one is probably stylistically the better. If you can say it goes as far as that. But there were little things like that. That was one bit that I particularly noticed. I mean,
the warehouse bit as well was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Same with the puddle sequence as well. When we see
with Pinhead,
Pinhead in the puddle. I thought bits like that just, there's a potential there. If this guy knows what he's doing with visualization, he can frame a scene well. I just thought the storytelling was absolutely inept.
Yeah. A lot of what we see could have been concluded quite easily within the hour. Like we do get a lot of repetition in this. Yeah, as I say, even like slight variations on something that's happened before, but we're getting maybe a tiny bit more context in this scene from when we did last time. So that was the frustrating part. It felt like, you just wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake and, just get to the point already.
Because there's a lot of content, but as I was saying, it's not very substantial. This is a really episodic approach you've got here. Like, there's not much connective tissue. It's just scene after scene after scene, which we know isn't going to have much of an overall impact on the plot because we're trained not to believe anything that's happening in it, I think, like, you could level that partly at Inferno as well, that both of these films, they kind of explain away some of their more annoying aspects with the plot twist at the end. I think with Inferno, you actually had a lot more heart in it than you did in this. I think Inferno, you had this idea of a guy who, because of a traumatic childhood of his own, he'd gone on to repeat this with his own kids. And with this, I think the only heart of this movie relies upon us having a kind of an inbuilt goodwill for Kirsty Cotton, who barely even features. Like, potentially, we've got something intriguing here, because you've got a guy who doesn't really know his own story, who can't trust his own memories, and we're experiencing the world with him. So there should be a rapport there. He's our way into it. We're confused like he is, and boy, does this guy look confused throughout the course of the movie. But it's so one note. Like, Dean Winters, he's not a relatively good actor in other things. He's the Vulture in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, He's really good in 30 Rock as well, where he's doing these comedic roles. And just here, I don't know if he's just didn't have much to work with. He didn't, but I don't know if that was the main problem. but like he just plays it like a blank slate. Like nothing particularly bothers him. You know, he sees like his friend commit suicide, and he's like, you know, he comes across a dead body.
He's permanently just miffed throughout this film.
There's even a bit at the beginning where he's laying on a gurney in the hospital. We're led to believe that he's there following the car accident, but then it slowly transpires that this isn't the first time he's been in. And just the way he sits up from there, he's just got a kind of like this half smirk on his face, despite the fact he's meant to be really distressed at this point. It's just, oh, that's the shot you're keeping for this bit, is it?
He's not quite in sync with where he's supposed to be at emotionally. Yeah.
It is in stark contrast to everyone else in the movie who's just really pissed off all the time. You know?
Everyone else is like, I made a note of this. Like everybody acts suspicious. Everybody, like Kirsty Cotton acts suspicious of him, not without cause. The masseuse was wicked suspicious. The neighbor that he's having an affair with the girl next door, but she has her own boyfriend who's also wicked suspicious. And in Hellraiser 5, we did have this sort of Cenobite-like creature that didn't dress like the other Cenobites, but obviously it pulled its face off, and you saw that it was obviously Detective Joseph underneath. And you had something similar to that going about in this film with, I think, like a stocking over its head, and he would just appear randomly in the background and look menacing. And I don't think that ever came to anything, really.
I think that was to indicate that, he is involved with the Cenobites somehow. Maybe he's used the puzzle box at some point, and we're just building up to when that has happened, or, you know, something has happened. But as you say, everyone being suspicious, I think plays into the reveal at the end. But again, everything is played on a bit too much. It goes on a bit too long. But I think once everything ties together, it works quite well. It goes in its favor. All of the characters, you know, have been involved in this guy's life. We know by the end that everything we've watched up until this point is him getting his ironic punishment, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just a shame that he's just such an uninteresting character.
Yes.
I mean, I think Thorne had more of a backing story here, whereas here we go, well, he didn't love Kirsty. You're like, well, okay, later on we can understand this because it turns out she's torturing people. But why? We don't really know why their marriage was breaking apart. We just know that he was shagging around a bit.
Yeah, we don't know that he knows that she was torturing other people. I mean, presumably when she opened the box to begin with, that's when she made the deal with Pinhead, which unfolds in a very weird way. It's like, no more deals, Kirsty. This time I come for you. And she's like, how about I make a deal with you? And Pinhead goes, interesting.
Well, yeah, when she randomly goes, 5 souls, and he's like, done, and she's like, shit, I should have said 2. You know? Okay, so obviously he doesn't know that she's a killer, but the point I'm getting at is, like, as an audience, we stop sympathizing with her, but we don't have any idea why their relationship got to the extent that he wants to kill her. So, I just want to mention a couple of really funny things in this film. The 2 cops who are both going, hey, wife killer, you know, both outright accusing him. The reveal that those 2 cops are actually the same person. And you're like, why is that a twist? Both of them have accused him of murder. Maybe you could have, like, a good cop and a bad cop so it works. I mean, they do refer to one of them in dialogue as being a softie, but he's absolutely not a softie, on the grounds he's also accused him of murder. Like, these guys, they're like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the Hellraiser world, you know? They're basically replaceable. And
I will say, right, so just to jump in quickly with Detective Lang and Detective Givens, because they try and do the thing where you never see the 2 of them together. And there is a sequence where he's in the police station with, just as a quick aside note as well, with the police station, police brutality is very much at the forefront of this
in the
movie. Taser in the neck, and there's like the scene with the guy with the bat on, and he's just battering someone to a bloody pulp. But these are just these creepy scenes that are just off askew and have nothing really to do with the main plot at all. There's also Detective Lang. They sit down, they have a quick chat. I don't think you did it, but you might have did it. And then they shake hands to go. But then, of course, because Detective Givens can't be in the same scene as Detective Lang because they're one and the same, Detective Lang holds his hand out to indicate a different detective. This is Detective Givens. And the camera just sort of pans quickly to like a security guard sat at his desk reading a newspaper, and it's never quite made clear that there's nobody there that he indicated. It's just a really weird sequence.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh, classic Bota. That's a great twist.
As we're getting to the crescendo, there's a bit in his office as well where the detective turns up, where he's like telling his friend, "What did you tell him? You didn't tell him that I killed her, did you?" You know, and then he's sat at his desk. He's like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah.
So they go through the same thing again, I suppose. And then as he turns around and walks away, the other detective's there. That was again, but at this point you think, oh well, you know, everything's descending into shit anyway. So he's obviously in something or other.
Yeah.
Well, what's weird is we know from earlier in the film that this is a place where the CCTV cameras have audio as well. You got that bit where his boss is trying to harass him. I think it's that bit. And then he sat there watching a workplace workplace shenanigans on his monitor. And he's got the audio, but he's not got headphones in.
By the way, because obviously CCTV, that would filter through to the security guard's office. The things that those guys must be seeing happening in that office.
And I want to tell you guys another great bit, my personal favorite bit of the movie, right? The friend in it, when he comes up to him, he's got the gun and he's going, "Oh, where you been? Yeah, I've been looking all over for you," right? Points the gun at him, saying, "You flaked on me. You were meant to be. We had a deal. We're meant to be killing the wife together." And he goes, "I'm not going to jail. I'm going to go to hell, where I'll see you." And then shoots himself in the fucking head. Like, he's trying to intimidate him by killing himself. Like, I'm going to think twice about that. You know, if that's what he's willing to do to him, think of what he's going to do to me. And we get this punch sign effect, like, first time I watched that, I remember just thinking, what a fucking idiot. Killing himself in an intimidating manner, which, by the way, is a bit of a signature of Rick Bota, because that happens in the next one as well. The guy leaps in front of the subway.
Yes. It's such a bizarre sequence, because it's like, he comes off and says, "I've been looking around for you everywhere." So he's been looking around with him. If it's premeditated suicide, was he looking for the guy to kill himself in front of him? Like, I want to kill myself in front of Trevor just so he gets the message.
It's gonna hurt me more than it hurts you.
I thought he could at least shoot Trevor and then himself, you know?
No. It just shoots himself.
Like, it's such a stupid deterrent. Like Trevor's like, "Well, you know what? That's the biggest liability in the case dead now, because he could have grassed me up."
And I mean, the evidence would be solid. This guy actually did shoot himself, so all the evidence, forensic-wise, will point to that.
And also, Trevor now gets to keep the other 50% of their apparent deal, where he's going to give his friend 50% to know the story.
But he is intimidated, though.
No, he just looks confused again. He's like, "Ooh."
He's very confused throughout the whole film. He's confused from the very beginning right up until the very end, when finally the Cenobites' chains with the hooks do start ripping out and catching his body and pulling him apart, and he's got the sort of tugged face effect. That, I mean, he's still confused there, because remember, at this point, Pinhead is actually explaining the plot to him as he's being tortured. So he's perhaps not in the best position to receive that information.
Yeah, and at that point, I do feel like that went too quickly, considering everything we've been through for the previous, 75 minutes on a constant loop almost. And then that's over in a flash. I did feel a bit shortchanged with that. Though I must say, I think that was probably the most impressive part effects-wise out of the last few films we'd seen up to this point. I think there's definitely a leap in the effect of the effects, if you know what I mean. As I was saying previously about how visceral and manky the original films were compared to how, I suppose, clean it then started to look. It felt like we were going back to a better visual style in terms of the gore and the grottiness. So yeah, that I like that a bit as well.
Yeah, because even at the beginning, you've got the brain surgery going on, which is quite nasty. As Alistair's pointed out to me before, for using a dirty needle during that scene, which just adds to the kind of this kind of feeling of griminess.
Yeah, I think they're trying to parallel Pinhead with that as well. I mean, the size of the needle they're using is very similar to when you would see in 2 and 3 him like taking the pins out of his head, like at the altar in 3. It reminded me of that. In fact, there was a few nods to the previous films in there.
I was just about to say that with the brain surgery sequence, and we were seeing it from Trevor's perspective this time, with the brain surgery sequence, that reminded me of Hellraiser 2. But in that film, we're with the surgeon, who is Dr. Chenard, working on someone's brain as he's espousing quotes from the Book of Wisdom. And in this film, of course, we're seeing it from Trevor's perspective, and the people are blatantly saying, we're going to start poking him in the most distressing parts of the brain, and then they do. And it does come across it is quite an effective sequence in that one. Just quickly, I want to bring up another sequence of this film that, when I realized, if you think it through, it's a bit crazy, where the detective, and this is Detective Lang, at the crime scene at the very end of the film, where we're presumably back in the real world after all the dream sequence stuff, he has a plastic bag with the lament configuration in it. And it says that your husband was clutching, we found his body and he was clutching this in the river. And he looks around to make sure no one hears him. And he gives Kirsty Cotton back this crucial piece of evidence and lets her go with it. And we're also meant to believe that the car went off the road into the river, but she shot him whilst he was driving.
Yeah, that bit I didn't quite get. Like, clearly there's a gunshot wound in his face.
Now, unless Kirsty had said to them, like, he was looking around for me all over the place, and then he just randomly shot himself in the head.
Yeah, that was it. Yes,
do you know what I mean? Unless they make it like his partner in crime had shot himself, just to make sure that joke lands.
She mentions he shoots himself, but that just felt so unlikely to happen at that point. It's just like,
whilst he was
driving,
driving,
you shoot yourself in the face as you're about to drive into a watery grave anyway? Just making sure, making sure all the bases are covered, I suppose.
Well, that's like, but as we just discussed, that's him saying, "Oh yeah, I'm willing to do anything to you. Watch what I'll do to myself."
I'm going to shoot myself in the head, drive off a bridge into a river, and then eat an eel.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. Well, I like the bit where they take the fish out and put it in the evidence bag as well. That really pleased me.
It's evidence.
As if, like, that could have been.
Your Honour, I want to draw your attention to Exhibit F.
Maybe the eel's a suspect as well.
It wasn't the gunshot wound that killed him. It was suffocation by eel.
That was a pretty neat little callback there, because you have that bit where he's in his kitchen or wherever, in his apartment, where he suddenly starts choking. Like, we think maybe it's like an anxiety thing, but then he throws up that eel, which again we see later on.
That was the sequence, just to go back to that note I had, of everybody's suspicious, because he keeps looking out his window thinking there's someone there. And when we see the masked man again, leads to nothing. But then another time he looks out that window, this woman walks in, whips her top off, and then they see randomly, and then they see each other, and then she's like annoyed and tries to, like, she closes a curtain, but it's like a transparent curtain that covers nothing. What is the point in this scene?
I've got another couple of wee points to give here. The Cenobites are basically there as props. They're there to dress up a scene, but they don't really do anything when they're there, except just kind of stand there. I do agree that the chain sequence at the end looks cool, but I just hope the Cenobites, there's even less point to them in this than there was in Inferno. And also, for something, this will come up again in the next film, where they go like, oh, what's the difference between alive and dead? And I think Rick Bota likes this thing of having opposites and implying they're the same. Like, in this, they go good and evil, light and dark, opposite sides of the same coin. It's as if the film is presenting itself as both a dry and damp squib. But
I just want to quickly say this just now, actually, about the Cenobites in particular, and how and this is not something that occurred to me until this most recent watch through, where we have, the original 4 Cenobites. You had Pinhead was talking, and so was the female Cenobite. She was talking as well. and Butterball and Chatterer were functionally, they were like the muscle of the group, if you will, to use sort of maybe mafia terms. But ever since the Cenobites are dispatched in 2, Pinhead comes back in 3, and essentially from 4 onwards, we're getting a different clique of Cenobites per movie. And Hellraiser 6 is no exception. We get different Cenobites in this movie that I don't think we see the Surgeon ever again. But not from basically 4 onwards, we never see another talking Cenobite. They're all sort of mute as well in the background. I mean, we had, of the talking ones, there was J.P. Monroe and Terry in 3. In 1 and 2, obviously the female Cenobite, and in 4, it was Angelique. Now, basically, the female Cenobite is the only one that was talking before we knew anything about the character. Angelique, J.P. Monroe, and Terry, and Camerahead as well, actually. All of them we saw as either a demon with Angelique or in human form beforehand. So we got to see them transition and then become talking Cenobites. From 4 onwards, none of the Cenobites ever talk. None of them. And I think it's just because they don't want to take lines away from Doug Bradley's Pinhead. They keep him, you get all the lines. You're literally the talking head of evil in these films.
Are you sure we didn't get... I thought the female Cenobite in part 8 said something just so we get the tribute to the original. Doesn't she speak very briefly?
It's done as an homage to the female Cenobite. I mean, we'll talk about it more when we get to that point, but she's not a Cenobite. She was not transformed. She was injured in the way that is meant to evoke the female the imagery of the female Cenobite. She was not. I'm
following that.
Yeah, she was not, as from what I can. I mean, you can interpret these films any bloody way, and it'll still make as much sense. I don't think she was a Cenobite, so yeah.
We'll get to that later, but I take that as the kind of the transitioning phase there was beginning or something. But because for suddenly all got bad intentions towards their friend. But yeah, we'll get to part 8. Speaking of which, let's get finishing up with part 6. Let's do our star ratings. Jim, what star rating would you give part 6?
Believe it or not, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. It's a bit messy, a bit. As I say, it whizzed by in no time, and as frustrating as it was, I found it as engaging, and I actually quite enjoyed it. I liked the reveals at the end, and I liked the way everything neatly tied together, and I also liked the little nods throughout as well. I remember seeing a string of CDs at Trevor's cubicle in his office, similar to the same, what the Cenobite gets lodged in his head in Hellraiser 3. The on the nose stuff in the acupuncture room where she's sticking all the needles in him, and then Pinhead appears and she has that massive one through the back of his head. Just little things like that all made up. Not a great film, but an enjoyable one.
I liked the way those needles vanished while they were having sex as well.
It's convenient.
There's some bad continuity there.
Alistair, what about yourself? How many stars would you give this one?
I'm going to give it 2. I mean, there are some ideas in there, but unfortunately for me, it's all squandered potential. Like, Kirsty Cotton could have been so much better utilized. The story itself, I mean, the bones of the story, there's a good idea in there, but the meat was all wrong of this, if that makes any sense. I think I'm using the right analogy for a Hellraiser film. But it's because I counted, he wakes up 13 times, and basically it's the laziest form of Deus Ex Machina. The writers will write themselves into a hole to build up tension, drama, excitement. How does he get out of this? He wakes up. And for there to be 13 in one film, that's a lot.
Yeah, in fact, actually, to bring this full circle, during the Grudge remake, you have a lot of this as well. Like the most recent Grudge, you get a lot of this as well, where it's Act 3, and you're still getting these vanishing ghost jump scares, which you would normally get in Act 1 of the film. And it just means that we don't feel particularly engaged because we don't believe anything of consequence can happen to this guy.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this one 2.5. The thing is, it isn't as good a film as Inferno. But I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy watching it more. I don't think this film works for the reasons it's supposed to. I think you've got this kind of very fast paced approach to filmmaking where it's almost like an extended music video. And while you do have some striking images, there's so much goofiness to it. Like Kersey suddenly becoming a murderer just like that. You know, you've got the weird twist of the cops both being the same person. This inexplicable sexual appeal that Trevor has of everyone who meets him.
What is his appeal?
Yeah, the guy shooting himself in an intimidating manner. Like, all of these just make it quite an enjoyable movie. And I did like seeing Kirsty coming back in it, even though I thought she was completely misused. So,
I mean, I'd say that it was good seeing her again in the film series. It was, I won't lie.
yeah, I mean, it's not a good film, but I think it also went past really quickly, and I found it to be relatively fun. To give my last word here to Pinhead himself, fertile ground, but rather mundane. Yes. And on that, let's move on to Deader.
Whoever you were meant to find me today. There is no turning back. And above all, don't open the box. Please do it for us. You wouldn't be here if you didn't belong here. Tell me it's real. You wouldn't be here if you didn't belong here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't belong here. If you didn't belong here. Tell me it's real. Well, don't open the box. Don't open the box.
Deader! This is the 7th Hellraiser and yet another straight-to-video one. At this point of the series, the lore is getting as messy as a Cenobite's web search history. This is maybe the most boring film of the series for me. And I'll tell you why. This is one of those movies where we have this half-hour bit, which is doing the Bota thing again of, oh, what's real, what's fantasy? But we already know the character's dead because we've watched her die. And the story that she's discovering is one that we know from the beginning because we see an abusive older person who's no longer there, and we know that she takes shit off nobody. So we can assume from that she probably killed this guy. And yet, we watch her struggle with this moment of revelation for about 25 minutes towards the end. The plot just grinds to an absolute halt, like, as we watch her go, oh yes, this horrible thing that I did that nobody in the audience will negatively judge me for doing because we all hate the father as much as she did. So basically, I think this is the single most, it's not the worst Hellraiser film, but it's the most boring Hellraiser film in the series. Discuss.
Maybe not. There are moments where I did find myself checking my watch, but to say it's boring, no. The subtitle, for a start, is ridiculous. I know it relates to a certain cult in the film, but still, why it's called Deader and not Midnight Goth Train, I don't know. I mean, that whole subplot was wild. An underground train, well, half of an underground train that doubles as a goth disco sex club. It just, I think Rick Bota must be missing the year 2000 at this point. I mean, it looks, it just screams Y2K when she steps on that train.
I'd actually say, I think this film's set in the 1980s, to be honest, because they sent each other videos.
That's true.
And I don't think it's got very modern aesthetic. Like for me, I don't think it's seen to be set in present day. Like this is 2005, and nobody had a mobile phone.
It's 2005, but I think it's low budget.
And it is Eastern Europe, remember? They had the camera filter set to Cold War for this one.
Despite all the convincing accents and the obviously authentic newspaper office at the beginning. This is Eastern Europe they filmed it in. Cinema magic.
Yep, Romania, wasn't it? And yeah, it's like you can tell they've gone to Romania because the first 5 minutes it's quite bright. I said probably an orange sort of glow to it. As soon as we get to Bucharest, it's grey and blue.
I love that she gets the train to Bucharest from London,
which wasn't obviously London though.
No, the whole film, it was all filmed in Bucharest.
I mean, obviously the the publication she worked for was called the London Underground, but that could have been set anywhere. To be fair, like the people working there, the guy running the show was annoyingly English, but yeah, that could have been set anywhere. But I did like the article she was working on at the beginning. I mean, it was some hard-hitting journalism of how to be a crack whore.
Yeah, like we're told she's an amazing journalist. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, she's really good. You know, great with the words, raw talent, etc." Just like, just like Rick Bota. But at the same time, or Tommy Wiseau. But the thing is, this kind of talent she's meant to have, she's using the word crack whore in a headline. Like she's even
Crack whore in a headline, and she's punching down in that article clearly.
Like in 2005, I don't believe that even the Sun would put that in its headline.
Now, that opening was interesting. I mean, obviously, it's a bit of a red herring, supposed to be misleading. But I did notice something about the texture on the wall behind where Amy supposedly woke up and started taking her photos of this crack den. It was textured just like Pinhead's head. So it did have me questioning whether she's woken up already in her own hell again, just like the previous couple of films we've had.
Well, I mean, we definitely know the point that she enters it during the course of this movie.
Oh yeah, I know. She finds the puzzle box in the hotel.
This film does give us some information that 6 didn't. That we see the point of box opening.
Is that what she's? I thought she entered hell from the moment that the Deaders kill her. I thought Pinhead was just coming out for a bit of a natter at that point.
I mean, with Rick Bota, there's so many dream sequences that, I mean, anything could be true. But I'll have to say this with all 3 Rick Bota films. My interpretation, and just insert those words in front of everything I say, is that like she opens the box and then the hooks come out and grab her by the head, but then we have Pinhead saying, "You've got nothing to worry about." Like he gives a really odd speech. Like he's not after her; he's after this other guy that we'll talk about shortly, I'm sure. But the hooks have come out. They got her by the head. She's bleeding from the brain, and it's okay. You got nothing to worry about. It's one of those tonally really weird mixed messages that this film that comes out. Just about the beginning, the intro of the film. I just want to mention all the crash zooms. When as you say, Jim, the annoyingly English guy has her in his office.
Yeah,
here's a video. Watch this video, and we do constant crash zooms of the video and constant crash zooms on the actress Carrie Ware, who I'm a big fan of because she was Agent Tanya in Red Alert 2. And she's in this film playing what I would say is charitably a less great role. But by the way, the girl in the video, she holds, and we're meant to be watching a snuff film here when, I don't know if this is trying to tap into something like the Faces of Death DVD series or anything like that, but she's lying on her back, she's on the sort of Teflon plastic covering, and she's got this massive gun to her head, and everyone's stressing out, and we get so many shots from different angles of that gun to her head that I'm wondering how many cameras are in the room at the time. And it's all, with the way it's all edited together, like how many people are filming this? Because you would assume it would just be the one person with the camera. It must be at least 5.
It reminds me of Star Trek 4, where they're watching footage of the previous film.
I know what you're saying. It's like, oh, was that on CCTV? But of the outside of the ship blowing up?
That reminds me of, did you guys ever see the movie Captivity with Alicia Cuthbert?
No.
Well, I'm going to give you guys a bit of a plot twist spoiler here.
Go for it.
We find out the people who are torturing her, keeping her here, for 2 brothers. The reason this makes no sense is the video that reveals it shows both of them in it and the camera's moving. So you're like, so it's 2 brothers and the cameraman that's we can do all this stuff. Or camera person, I should say. But
oh man,
this movie though, like, I'm going to make myself sound really stupid here, but can any of you guys actually explain to me what the Deaders' plan here was, right? Because they're going, all right, so we want to open this box because I feel like I should take over hell. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind about this. Number one, they are incapable of opening the box, which has never presented an issue for anyone up until this point. Number two, they want people to be dead to open the box. Number three, their plan is this. They give her, they stab her, then they bring her back to life, and then she opens the box. But for some reason, when she chucks a box across the room, which opens it, they go, no! Which is surely the one thing they want her to fucking do. And then when Pinhead comes up, he goes, oh yeah, you thought you could take over hell? No. And then kills everyone in the room, right? So, and then for some reason dies when she stabs herself, despite her entire arc has been about moving on from her demons and finding a reason to live. Honestly, what am I missing? Explain this to me as if I'm 5. What the fuck happens in this
my
film?
interpretation of that is the Deaders are trying to get an army together to take over from the Cenobites. I assume.
If I could jump in, just quick from what I took from this is that the Deaders, they all want to do the sacrificial self-killing of, well, themselves, and then bring themselves back to life. But that's sort of done as sort of a Fight Club style thing where you join this club and then there's like an initiation, and obviously that's the initiation. Now I should say that this film links in with the fourth film, where there is a family who, like the Le Marchand, who made the box initially, and he's a cursed bloodline, and we're looking at a member of that bloodline, that lineage in this film. Now, and I said this to David, I'll pass this to yourself as well, Jim. When we watched Hellraiser 4, do you remember how when it was present day, we had a section in that was set, I think it was 1995, and the man in that section, he had a son.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if we're supposed to believe that son is the Le Marchand bloodline man in this film.
It could be. It just mentions that he is of that lineage. But I just think it's kind of getting to that point in, well, to put it similarly to the recent Star Wars sequels, everything's got to be connected somehow just because. You know, it's not necessarily that kid from Bloodline, but, you know, because it's a sequel, we have to link it to this one because we have to. I mean, this guy could have been anyone for what it's worth. For me, it had no impact on anything that had happened in this film whatsoever.
I would also say that I don't think that, sorry to interrupt, but I don't think the Deaders are actually fully aware of what Le Marchand's plan is.
Yeah, that comes.
He's wanting to get them to kill themselves, but they're joining this club because essentially what they said is once you're dead, you can't die again. So he's attracting people who want immortality.
It's clear there's ulterior motives from him. I mean, the guy's shady as anything from the get-go.
Yeah.
Then, though, the thing is, because the idea that once you're dead, then you can't die again. So that would make sense, the idea of trying to build up an army. But he's also wrong, right? Because the thing is, whether they could die or not, and I guess we don't necessarily know if they die. What we do know is that Pinhead's harder than them because he's got superpowers and they don't.
Pinhead does actually kill them all.
Yeah, it's just if this guy had his absolutely perfect ending, then what actually happens here? So he go, okay, we've killed her, brought her back from the dead, and then for some reason, now that she's back from the dead, we've made her kill herself again, right? And we now have this box, a box that he was not planning on opening. Yet he also, because he gets pissed off when she opens it, but a box that he also explicitly says is his gateway to hell, which he intends to take over. I just think at this point, like, the motivations just sort of fell apart for me. It wasn't clear what the baddie wanted. And it wasn't hugely clear, like, what the ethos of his group was. Yeah, it's a battle that's been raging for centuries, because we know that from part 4. But that bit of exposition, Pinhead's basically just there for exposition in this film. But that bit where Pinhead's like, your ancestor was a toy maker, it's not built up upon enough for us to know, well, what's the nature of his conflict, because Pinhead comes out, says this, taunts him, kills about 9 people, and then fucks off because for some reason her killing herself closes the box again.
Yeah, I see it. Have you seen the film Dogma, where there's a loophole for getting back into heaven?
Yeah, good film.
I see it as kind of along those lines. What they're doing with this dead occult is somehow harvesting souls, which is charging the lament configuration or the version of it that they have here. And for some reason, possibly explained, and I've lost it in the tirade of, oh, I'm in trouble. Oh no, I've just woken up here. Pinhead can't directly do anything about it. So once Amy has opened the puzzle box, he's like, well, I've been looking on your CV and I can see you're investigating these people I'm coincidentally attached to. So here's what you're going to do for me. And so we go through like an hour of, is this real? What's happening here? Am I dead? Is she dead? Who's this guy? And it all ties up to this cult in the end, somewhat vaguely, but she is a vessel for Pinhead. And if she charges the box with her soul rather than completing it physically, then it'll go in the favor of the merchant guy. If she opens the box physically, then it'll unleash Pinhead on them. So it's something along that, but it's still vague.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that's a pretty good extrapolation.
There are some effective sequences in the films that I quite like. My favorite actually being the knife in the back that she pulls out but continues bleeding from. This is, I think, after she is actually a deader at this point.
Yeah, that was
deader is a bit
cool.
silly, but that was a very good sequence. I really quite like that. I think there's elements of this film that kind of remind me of was it Death Becomes Her? You see that film, Bruce Willis and Goldie Hawn?
Yeah, I liked. I thought it was pretty neat how she was very practical in getting that knife from out of her back as well, wedging it in the cupboard door.
Yeah, it was a very effective sequence, but the fact that she keeps on sort of bleeding out forever.
Was that then followed on with? I can't remember if it's prior to that or after it. She wakes up in a hospital, and her boss from the newspapers there. She's shackled, and then she then goes and sits in a room with kids in for some reason. They're like colouring in and scaring.
I know what you mean.
So
that whole sequence could have been edited out of the film, but this is a sort of thing I find, but maybe it's his experience as a music video director, where he can create these sort of visages where, because presumably the song's already there, all you have to do as a music director would be create the visuals. And he's creating the visuals for a lot of these films without the music necessarily being there. And that whole sequence was very much edited for, I mean, it's one scare, it's a predictable scare where the child's drawing a monster.
Yeah.
But I still kind of like that scene, even though you can remove it from the film and the film still is not improved or worse in any way.
You could say that about a lot of the scenes. But she then meets one of the deaders in the waiting room. She's the one that we've seen,
Marla.
Dotted throughout the film, occasionally decaying, occasionally not. So I thought that was okay. It kind of built up to that bit where we have a bit more exposition. Although I did notice the cartoon she was watching on the TV in the waiting room. I had that on video when I was a kid. It was a Felix the Cat one, I think.
There's a great big fat guy and there's two pistons slapping into his belly.
Old King Cole, and he was having the wind knocked out of him because he was full of shit, basically.
Brilliant. I was wondering about that as I watched it. I have to say that probably not a good sign if I'm more interested in what's on the TV in a film than the actual film itself. I just want to bring up another sequence I thought was quite effective, was actually the dead person. And this is Marla's corpse as well, in the toilet at the start of the film, where she gets the box. She gets the envelope with the video, the box, and she creeps around the corpse, picks it up, and has to get out of there. And then we do get that jump scare of the body coming alive again. And so, when you see a scene and you remember it, and then you watch the film, you think it's in, and oh no, that must have been the other one. So I did get confused really with pretty much the exact same sequence in Christoph Gans's Silent Hill movie, where there's a very similar sequence of a body barbed wired into a toilet cubicle, And in Silent Hill, there's a little note inside the mouth, but in this one, it's obviously the hands clutching the box. And I think it was a very effective jump scare. But I think there's also the observation to be made that she bribed the landlord to go into someone's flat that was not her own flat. And so obviously that's bribery for trespass. And this landlord doesn't know there's a dead body in there.
I think he must have known there's a dead body there. Like, I don't buy that he hasn't checked it to be able to know to take a bribe for this.
Like, she walks in and retches. She's like, oh, what's that smell? I don't smell anything.
I mean, maybe for him, there's dead bodies showing up all over the place. They don't make Bucharest look particularly amazing in this. Although one thing I will say in fairness, whilst the Bucharest Tourist Board will definitely not thank them for this movie, it feels like much more of a real location than we had in the last movie. Like, Part 6 mostly just takes place indoors.
Yeah.
Like in Part 4, it was a period drama that still almost all took place indoors as well. I think that, like, in using Romania here, we see like a proper train, for instance. We see proper streets. There's just something about seeing locations which makes a film feel a bit more effort went into it than Part 6.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the train, they use that on multiple occasions. You've got the dead leaders throwing himself in front of one for a start, as well as the midnight goth train. Going on to that, who gets a tattoo on a train? Who would do that on a moving vehicle?
Not one person, but two at least.
They did it on Jackass, but yeah.
I think that's different. Jackass, you aspire to get a tattoo on a train. In this film, it looks like these people just really wanted that train sequence is very bizarre. It's people taking drugs, people having a party, tattoos, and there's an orgy going on. There's a lot going on that train.
Yeah, it felt like with Rick Bota, he's like, we'll put some gratuitous nudity in the film because it's cool, and like, here's some piercings and tattoos. We can use this as being like an indicator of a person being creepy or evil or something. It's just something a bit lowbrow, but I was wondering, right? So we've got a ton of extras on that train. Presumably there's about, we can imagine tens of people on this, right? They're probably reusing people, but they have something you don't normally have in horror films, and that's that you get a cock shot at one point. This dude just walks around with his junk hanging out. So think to myself, right? As an extra, would he be paid more than the other extras were? Because, like, you go, all right, we need some extras. I want you to sit there and talk to the woman beside you. I want you to take your cock out. You go, wait. Do I get paid like a cock bonus for this part? Because, like, if I was making my appearance in Hellraiser 7, the first thing you do is you're told to take your cock out by Rick Bota as he films this. I don't think you'd be pretty pissed off because you couldn't show your mates or anything. You go, look, this was a cold day that we filmed it.
They're shooting a film?
in Bucharest on a train at night, and everyone's dead.
I mean, don't get me wrong, right? Obviously the same thing goes where you've got all the women there who are topless in this movie. Where I'd like to think they would have been paid more from the other extras as well, since the nudity is completely needless. Like, it's rare to be a horror fan and complaining that the movie's got too many breasts in it, but
I think obviously it's a Hellraiser film, isn't it? So what are we missing? Oh yeah, a bit of grot. So sex train. Let's go.
Like where have the other films? Where have the other films are all like, all right, so we're going to look at like sin and salvation and lust and greed and stuff. Rick Bota doesn't really care about any of this. He's like, substance schmubstance. Just take your top off and it'll look cool. That's the Bota technique.
Bota technique. We'll fix it in post.
Rick, if you'd ever like to come on our podcast as a guest, you're more than welcome. We might have an exciting guest coming up, but I don't want to spoil things. Something I'm going to compliment this film over though, right? In the first act, I thought the mystery they brought up, to use the word that Jim always seems to use, which semi means shit, but I'm going to use it in a positive way, is I thought the first act was quite interesting. I thought the cult was the single coolest part of the film. It was just when we discovered what the cult was actually all about, the film really nosedived for me. But apparently, so this one and Part 8 were both shot back to back. It was a contractual obligation where if you're filming in Romania, you have to make 2 films. And apparently with this one, they were trying to go for a Japanese horror style. Whereas I assume with Part 8, they were trying to go for a style of like the Saw films. And I think the sort of rural mystery element here, the kind of slower pace, it does feed into that. But I just thought, like, the more we find out about the cult, the less interesting the story becomes, even though the basic concept is pretty cool.
Now you've mentioned it, yeah, I can see how it draws on a J-horror sort of influence. Like, there's just lots of, like, well, for a start, you've got them watching videotapes and stuff, and it's 2005. But yeah, like, just you've got that kind of sort of metropolitan look to it, the creepy, like, deaders appearing. As you've got the woman sat in the raincoat on the bench in the tube station, like, just bleeding on the floor. The guy supposedly throwing himself in front of the train. These are all things we'd have probably seen in Japanese horror a few years prior to that. Just like creepy little bits where it's like, have I actually seen that? Did that happen? But obviously in a little more of a heavy-handed way.
Yeah. I think with the guy throwing himself in front of the train, that was very much reminiscent of, the guy in Hellraiser 6 shooting himself in the head to intimidate his friend. And I want to speculate, because I think if you go to Romania, you have to film the deal is you have to film 2 films. And I wonder if that was why they filmed it there. Was that the only place where that film crew could afford to, in an actual train station, get an actual train to stop halfway and have other people searching it? Like, budget-wise, is that the only place they could afford that?
I assume so. A lot of films, especially from that time onwards, were all filmed in Eastern Europe, weren't they? Even some of the bigger budget ones were filmed in Eastern Europe, like Expendables and that sort of thing.
Something that amuses me about this as Jim called it, the sex train, is that the sex train seems to be going consistently between stations. So finding it would be an absolute pain in the arse. But also, I wonder if it gets like ticket inspectors or anything on it. We got that guy who seems to kind of like he seems almost like he's in charge of the thing. You know, I can't remember his name now; it's just escaped me. But the kind of steampunk guy at the end, the one who shows up later to say that she's got a fucked up, destructive thing about her because of her attitude problem and the fact that she smokes. But
everyone smokes in this film as well.
I was sort of wondering how kind of official this train's supposed to be. Because you get like over here in the UK, we have things like the party buses, right? Where people get in a bus goes between locations, and everyone's just like drinking and dancing and probably doing drugs on the party bus. But the thing is, with a train, it has to be part of a wider organisation. Like, it's not like TfL would go, oh, by the way, the sex train runs at this time.
Yeah, I just took it as it was part of some above the law criminal underground.
It's very easy to find.
Yeah, there's newspapers in the window. You're in luck.
This crime organisation makes this number of stops on these dates. And also, if you want to get off, I mean, they need to have facilities. They need to provide some sort of food or whatever. Because if you're just getting alcohol all the time and other substances, and then you suddenly want to get off the train, you'd actually have to start looking out for your stop.
Yeah, it'd be like, I want to have a hot dog.
But at the same time, if you want to get off, you stay on the train.
Yeah.
I see what you did. One of the wittier comments we have on this podcast.
You can, what is it? You can sign out, but you can never leave. Hotel California, that quote.
Yeah, we've got a bit of that there. I'm wondering, the guy leaping in front of the train to kill himself in an intimidating way, just like in the sixth one, I wonder if that's maybe also, sticking with the J-horror theme, a reference to Suicide Club, which of course opens with an iconic scene of lots of people killing themselves by jumping in front of a train. good film. If anyone's seen it, it's if anyone's not seen it, it's well worth checking out.
I've
Plot
actually
gets a
not.
bit
I
rad.
might check that out.
Yeah, it's got some really good special effects in it, some really eerie sequences. Got another compliment I want to give it, which is that the chain sequence at the end looks really cool, just like in the sixth one. By this point in the series, they're like, all right, we're retreading old ground. We've got a journalist doing a story that's going to bring her towards the box. Yeah, you've seen this before. Yeah, you've seen the chains before. But you know what? We can do both these elements okay. And I thought the chain is maybe the film's strongest bit.
Yeah, like effects-wise, definitely. Again, the effects in this one are a marked improvement on the previous sequels we talked about in the last episode, but perhaps not as good as Hellseeker. I think they go for more shocks in terms of jump scares and nudity in this one rather than anything else.
Just a quick aside for this film, the Cenobites themselves, we only really see Pinhead, and then other Cenobites turn up at the very end. I think we get Stitch and the Chatter at the very end. There was one that didn't make the final cut, which was called Spike, which is annoying because that would have been a very cool addition to what the Cenobites aesthetic were. Basically, Spike just has a massive spike through his head. Like, you can't see any of his face because that's how wide and long the spike is that runs lengthways through his head. And it was in a deleted scene, and there is actually merchandise, like they have little toys of the Spike Cenobite. Just to add as well to things that never quite made it into because Rick Bota seems to have the habit of there's cool things that should make it into the film, but they're not going to, like Spike, like in Hellraiser 6. There's an extended sequence of dialogue between Kirsty and Pinhead, which didn't make it into the film. And oh my God, it should have. It really should have. It would have tied things together much more nicely, but I can't imagine why they cut that.
Yeah, because the audience want more Kirsty. You know, it's nice to see her and Doug Bradley on screen at the same time. I've got another couple of quite petty points I want to raise. First one, right. As we have the Deaders doing their group chant as she's on the bed and we're going to sacrifice her, that is such an unenthusiastic group of people. As if they're watching their parents bang on that bed or something. Like, there's just nothing about this that suggests they're committed to their cause. And for me, that really stood out because these cult films, as we discussed a few episodes ago in the cult episode, listen if you haven't, that these cult films really revolve around this idea of devotion, this idea of people being brainwashed. And here we're just like, oh, they don't really seem to be giving a shit about the cause. Other wee things, the suicide to win trope irritates me because it's really overused, aside from potentially being quite reckless to use anyway. At the same time, there's so many films that I can think of where that happens. I'm not going to say their names for obvious reasons because it'd be spoilers. Some of them have been really critically praised, which kind of irritates me just because by this point it's such an easy way out of the story. And also because in this case, her entire arc seems to be about, again, finding a reason to live. And then the final bit, the twist we see where the boss is assigning another attractive female journalist who comes in, and he's going, oh boy, I got this video in the post. At this point, the Deaders don't exist any longer. So the idea that he's like some sort of roper, you know, here to like lure people into their plan just because every single supporting character has to be part of his conspiracy, it doesn't make any sense because what's he sending her to?
I think what he was trying to do there maybe was bookend the film. So in the same way the original Hellraiser was bookended in, I think it's an East Asian country or Middle East country where someone's looking for the box. And so the voice, what's your pleasure, sir? He buys the box, and then at the start of the film, it's Frank. But at the end of the film, he's selling the box to someone else. That sort of circular, this evil keeps going type thing. I think Rick Bota is trying to do that, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, because the plot elements aren't there. The box can be reopened. The Deaders aren't
the
going to be
story's
brought
been
back
resolved.
to life.
Yeah, not this time.
It's handy that the family get the box again to be able to do their thing up in space, but on something you guys were saying earlier about the effects in this film, I do think, to be fair to Mr. Bota, he makes a budget work for him in a way the director of Part 4 didn't. You know, he's saying, okay, realistically, what can we do with this money? Whereas in Part 4, you have this, what should be a huge scale, like a really epic horror film, and they can't do anything with it because they don't have the money to. It's like how with Part 5, Clive Barker had this vision of the entire city of London being swallowed by a box, right? Which could have been cool. And they went, look, tell you what, we're going to make Hellraiser Inferno because we're not giving you money to do that. The last film bombed, right? And this is going to be straight to video. Mm-hmm. Whereas it strikes me with these ones, they say, well, we're going to do something, what realistically can we do? We can do a small scale, relatively intimate horror film with a few big effects money shots, and they'll look all right.
I think the last couple of notes I have really for this film are the musical puzzle box is again a musical puzzle box because it actually makes a tinkling sound when Amy Klein is trying to open it. And reuse of the name Joey. So obviously the heroine from Part 3 was called Joey, and now the man in charge of the, midnight sex party drugs train, his name's also Joey.
Yeah, they do this a few times. Another name will crop up in Part 8 that we've had before.
Terry.
I just assume it's a little wink.
Well, Alison the next.
To the better films.
Yeah.
Wait, there is a Terry, though. We had a Terry.
Oh, yeah, we had a Terry showed up, and she was in Part 5, and she's in Part 3. There's an Alison in Part 8, and I'm pretty sure Alison's been used before in the series.
Is in 6.
Yes, okay, yes, Bota's referencing himself. The Botaverse. Jim, have you got any last comments you want to do before we do star ratings?
No, nothing more to add.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's do star ratings. Alasdair, what would you rate Deader out of 5?
2.5. Because I preferred the concept of the story to 6. It's not as obviously a remake of Hellraiser 5 as 6 was. It does have a lot working against this film, but there's still a good idea in there, and the effective sequences in this, like for me, really worked with getting the box out of the hand of the corpse in the bathroom, and again with the knife in the back. That worked for me. Fair dues.
I am personally going to give this one 2 stars. I think it's worse than the sum of its parts. We do have some decent bits in it, like as you say, the knife in the back is particularly good. The body in the toilet holding the box, bits like that are cool, but I just felt like the film's early potential just isn't realised, and as it goes on it just became kind of incomprehensible. For me it squandered away a good idea, and we just have again this habit of having these sort of fantasy sequences to uncover a backing story that A, we basically know already, and B, isn't particularly interesting when we learn more about it. I sort of liked the central character, Amy. I thought she was... I thought the actor was good. I think she did better with the material she had, actually. And I just wish it would have been a bit more to her than, all right, she doesn't take shit off anyone, she smokes like a chimney, and she's got a difficult backing story, which, again, you can guess very early in the film before we have a lengthy flashback to explain it. So, I'm going to give this 2. I think there's definitely the potential for a better film than 3, and since even 6. And that frustrates me because 6 is basically as good as it can be, right? And this should be a better film than 6. It's just, its flaws are so glaring that, again, it's not my least favourite Hellraiser film, but it's towards the bottom. And Jim, what about yourself?
I've got to agree with Alasdair on this one. It's 2.5 for me. While it is quite similar in structure to the previous film, I feel it doesn't piss you about as much. But on the other hand, there isn't as much there. Because it's less convoluted, it's probably a little more padded out in that case. But yeah, not quite as good as Part 6, but still not entirely abysmal.
Okay, now speaking of entirely abysmal, let's move on to Hellworld.
I'm going to a real life secret Hellworld party.
Welcome, Hellraisers. Invitations. If you need anything, just scream.
Hellworld. Folks, I want to tell you the tragic story of one Lance Henriksen. Lance Henriksen was originally going to play the part of Frank Cotton in the original Hellraiser film, but was unable to do so. So imagine his joy when 8 films later he gets approached to play the part of the host. This is the worst Hellraiser film in the series, I reckon. Don't be wrong, we have 2 to go. I've seen both of them before, and maybe I'll strongly reevaluate them, but for me, this is the absolute worst film in the Hellraiser series. And I'm just going to rip this one a new one. So, before I do, guys, is there anything that you particularly like about this film? Because my main compliment for it is we've got, again, this kind of contrast between bad writing but some quite visually striking moments. The bit in the bar where everyone's ignoring the guy and he turns around and suddenly they're all hung from the ceiling look kind of cool. The asthma sequence is fairly tense. As an asthmatic myself, I was like, oh, I'm empathizing with the pressure. And the house itself is quite a good location. They give it a history. There's some decent visuals attached to it. And that's basically it. Lance Henriksen elevates some pretty shitty material. I mean, to be fair, Lance Henriksen doesn't really have the most quality control. But even for him, this is a weak movie. And also, I think the opening sequence tricks you into thinking you're about to watch something better. We've got this kind of somber music in the church. And I thought an okay reaction to the suicide. But for many reasons, which I'm about to go into later, this is the weakest film of the series. What do you reckon, Alasdair?
Yes, quite possibly the weakest entry of the series as well. There's, not really that much ground to cover with this film. Even though it is feature length, it's got a large amount of issues in it. The story, Mace basically being one of them, it reminds me actually of when you were a kid and you had those, there's a series of books called Point horror books. And they're all pretty sort of straightforward slasher flicks. And this film kind of reminds me of a lot of those. Our
audience of largely men between 35 and 45 will be saying, I remember the Point horror.
I certainly do.
Yeah, no, it really reminds me of a lot of them. And there's just, there are good things in it, and basically you did cover that in your initial summarization of the film. The location was good. There was some sound audio effects that did elicit memories of the first film and the flapping of the wings, the pigeons, stuff like that. But it's, this is really the...
Jim, what did you reckon? Tough. What did you reckon? You're going to tell us you thought it was amazing, right?
I know I'm normally the contrarian, but I think I probably liked it a little bit more than you guys did. I wouldn't say it's particularly good. I think out of all of the Hellraisers we've seen so far, I know it's been mentioned a few times that, this one is reportedly not originally written as a Hellraiser. This one is the most glaringly obvious one as being retrofitted to be a Hellraiser film. Because even when you get to the end, you think, why the fuck was that a Hellraiser film? This to me feels like it was hidden in an office drawer. Oh, there's a script for this horror film for 1997. Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's put put a little mark in there. We'll change that to Pinhead. Oh, we'll put the puzzle box there. There we go. We've got our film. I know what you did last Hellraiser.
And it works because he's using exactly the same plot twist that he's used before. The thing is, like, it's This did begin life as a short story, an unrelated short story, but it's been adapted to be a Hellraiser film, and it shows. I mean, the fact of the twist at the end of the film is that the Cenobites are in it.
Yeah.
You get this first twist of going, oh, turns out the Cenobites weren't real. And the next twist is, oh yeah, my son didn't commit suicide. He just opened a portal to hell, and it turns out they are real. He's like, egg on my face, before showing up in the car again. By the way, Lance Henriksen, he's so clearly the villain of this film. He's like, human skin ornaments here.
What I didn't quite get, this is how the film loses itself, is that although we keep seeing Pinhead, we also see Lance Henriksen. It's implied that he is Pinhead at times, but then we see them in different shots of the same scene. He's out in the garden digging graves, whereas Pinhead's monologuing. So, is he acting as like a Renfield type character? Is he serving them up for the Cenobites? What's going on? And then it turns out this is all just a hallucination anyway. It's like, what the fuck?
But it isn't. It isn't. See, one of the most annoying things about this film is we're not sure of the mechanics by which the original plot twist, works. Because this party definitely happens because we have to have a reason to enter the house, right? But then some of the things of the party don't seem to happen, and the guests seem to kind of vanish then appear again. And then it's revealed that it's a hallucination that all of them are having collectively. Like, you're just like thinking, okay, well, what of the party bits did happen? Like, did the host here, did the host just create this fantasy for them where for some reason, part of his master plan is they all fantasize about having sex with lots of people? Which is, I'd say, quite generous of the host. Or at least even organising a party to get revenge, which includes shagging lots of people.
I guess if you have got teenage boys involved, that is a pretty low-hanging fruit, I suppose.
But he's like, I want to get my revenge, so I'm going to do something really sadistic. I'll invite him around to a party with lots of beautiful women who will sleep with him. And then afterwards, I'll bury them in my yard.
But again, it's subjective as to whether they actually did. Were they hallucinating that? Did one of them wank themselves to death while they were buried in the coffin?
Probably.
But
if you gotta go, you gotta go.
I love how elaborately staged everything is. This guy's created an online role-playing game based on the Hellraiser universe. Merch and everything. They've got t-shirts, masks, all based on the films we've watched previously. And then when we finally do get to see it, it's nothing more than like a crappy little Flash.
Yeah, it's one of those web browser games like on newgrounds.com or something. Again, audience of 35 to 45-year-olds will remember that website.
I was so disappointed. I don't know if you've seen it, but remember the episode of South Park where they're all playing World of Warcraft?
Yeah.
I was really hoping for something ridiculous like that.
Me too.
When I read what this was about, I thought, yes, here we go. This is my sort of shit. But no, all we see is them solving a flat pack puzzle box and then getting an invite to a party. And that was it. I was so disappointed. All that hype for this game, and that was it.
It's the least meta film there is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, firstly, it's not clear what relation this has to the other movies because the iconography all exists. They know what the Cenobites look like, but at the same time, they also directly reference the house and the cube of being created by the family. So both can't be true.
I think this is where it kind of gets lost in itself. Like it's thrown all these ideas out and all this, stuff where are they hallucinating? Is it real? What's happening? Is he Pinhead? Is he someone else? And it just ties itself in knots and can't quite explain what and why this has been going on.
Yeah, to correct something you're saying earlier, Phil, with Lance Henriksen, he didn't create this game because his son, keep in mind that his son committed suicide because he somehow got so into this web-based game, but that means he did have to hack the game to create the party. He basically took this from the I Know What You Did Last Summer school of tormenting your victims. You know, I'll buy them a holiday to a nice hotel in the Bahamas, they'll drive out and kill him. In this case, he's like, gonna invite them to a party, gonna get them laid, and then I'm going to bury them.
It's you're lost for words. It really is dumbfounding how elaborate and stupid this entire thing is.
Because the game had to be dumb enough for them to win it, so they could get the invites to the thing where he's trying to get them all killed.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm going to kill them, but I'm going to get lots and lots of other witnesses to be there.
and for a child, he never even had anything to do with as well.
Yeah,
that is literally raised in the film. So the fact that they're bringing it up in the film just goes to tell you how stupid this is.
Yeah, at the beginning he's like, either like, where's his dad? Didn't show up at the funeral, you know? And then like, using this as a kind of motive, I almost thought they were going to do something slightly smarter, where the reveal in the end is that the friends really did, really weren't paying attention to the warnings and just didn't really give a fuck about this guy, like they tormented him to death. Something like that would have presented a level of moral ambiguity that's really been lacking in these last couple of movies. You know, like part 7 again, she kills her dad to stop herself from being molested. Fine, right? In this one, they care about him. They're his best friends. He kills himself, and then the dad, who didn't give a fuck about him, goes, "I'm gonna get you because it's your fault." And you go, "No, it wasn't." Like, it's not like the original Hellraiser films were all about kind of sin and salvation, and these ones they're not really.
Well, this one is clearly ripped off from a half-baked slasher script that you can tell didn't know where to go. It didn't know what it was going to do with itself. And they needed a quick answer to we need to make another film. So this one, maybe got stuck between the drawers of a filing cabinet or something. Yeah, let's just throw Pinhead in that one.
And we'll chuck in a bunch of Rick Bota's signature, write yourself into a corner, and then something interesting happens, you wake up.
Yeah, I wish anyone loved me as much as Rick Bota loved doing that. It just, that guy absolutely goes for that. I mean, I'm surprised you managed to keep count in the first film, let alone the fact that it carried on over the next two.
Like, Rick Bota just goes, "Oh, well, maybe the audience have come to suspect I'll do this, so it'll be even scarier when I do it." You go, "That doesn't work, Rick."
Well, I've done this a lot, so they won't be expecting it if I do it again.
Yeah. Well, wait, surely this time it's real. You got me this time, Rick.
Yeah, there was quite a few similar moments that I suppose. There's a bit where, is it Chelsea? And she's trapped in one of the rooms and she calls the police. In one breath, she calls them and they can't hear her. She's like yelling down the phone, I'm at this address, but we can't hear you. There's anyone on the end of the phone. Very, very next cut, the police are outside. We've had a report that there's someone trapped in this building. And
well, hang on, but we do have a twist of that because the police show up and the party's clearly not on at that point, despite Lance Henriksen saying, "I like to party." At the same time, we're meant to buy that the ghost called up, right? The ghost of his son called up to grass him up. Now, what's really unintentionally funny about this, the ghost can use a mobile phone, but for some reason, lets him be buried for several days before he makes the call.
Yeah, I'll just let you wait for 2 days, then I'll make the call.
You're like, what a dick.
But yeah, I think it's the fact that it cuts immediately from her being on the phone to the police. Like, because at this point, we're still meant to believe that this is all happening real time. We don't find out this is all a hallucination until the end. But yeah, we can't hear you. Is anyone there? Oh, the police are here. And then she's on the phone to the police again right then. Like, so they've gone from not being able to hear her, is there anyone even calling, to her saying, "Yeah, I'm right in front of you."
They can hear a ghost call from the same house, which is strange. I mean, I guess she thinks this might be a bit like the end of 6, where, like, you know, she's managing to imagine the same police officers that she's spoken to, right? Or the police officer that might rescue her are the same ones that Lance Henriksen's talking to, right? But I mean, she shouldn't be. I guess her not being able to make the call is because she physically can't make a call. She sat there beside a mobile phone that Lance Henriksen's just taunting her through. Yeah. Presumably, like I don't know if Lance Henriksen's meant to be calling all of them at the same time to tell them what they're meant to be imagining or something. Because I just, like, this shared hallucination thing, it's like in so The Exorcist Part 2, where we've got synchronized hypnosis. It's a really unintentionally funny bit of the movie where they go, I know you have science on your side with this synchronized hypnosis. And you're like, what?
Such a strange film, that one.
A thing that irks me with the mobile phones as well is like that they've got this big rack of mobile phones. You know, they've got these sex masks with the phone number on. Yeah, and I know, I appreciate it's shared hallucinations, but at this point we don't know that when their phone rings, their name's on the display. These are all phones they've literally just been handed.
Yeah. So, which also implies that he knew which person was going to pick up which phone.
Well, it's also his thing of like, I tell you what, I'm going to torture these kids, but first, I'm going to get them laid. You know, we're going to organise this mask thing, which again probably does happen, because it's happening while some of them are still wandering around and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I actually quite liked the bit where they're being shown around. Here's my room full of foreshadowing, pickled babies and heads and all of that. The hook which Henry Cavill swings from, you know, gets warned about touching that, and so what's going to happen here then? You know, the same with the other lad with his inhaler. Oh, he's just taking his inhaler. We know what's going to happen later on, don't we? So yeah, really heavy-handed foreshadowing with that. But I liked the fact that we got to see them go off on their own thing. You know, it did go very slasher. They all went off on their own. They all did things they were solely interested in.
It kind of reminds me of the Charlie the Chocolate Factory in the way that each of the children, you know, they have their own different sort of vice, and that's what leads them into their own demise. And I think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Hellraiser 8 is quite an odd pairing to make, but that might have been what they were aiming for.
I mean, I made a Hamlet and Hellraiser 6 parallel with the cops. So, you know, Hellraiser can be compared to better media of these sequels. But the thing is, they don't all have a distinct vice, though. like, you know, I mean, having asthma isn't a vice, so it's the horniness is basically the vice for the guys. And the women in it are just a bit too boring to really have these sorts of
they just sort
nuances.
For instance, one of them, the girl gets bored. She walks into a room and gets strapped into the, you know, torture chair device. And what does annoy me about this scene, they're obviously going for a parallel to because she ends up with an injury similar to the female Cenobite in the first film. But the cut at the center of the throat, and you look at the two blades that are on that device, and they clearly don't line up at all with the injury she's supposed to later receive. So that always bugs me.
Yeah, like, and also later on in the film, like, why this one is the longest of the three we're talking about, I don't know. But later on, you've got Chelsea running around trying to escape, and they all come back, assumedly, in Cenobite form. I thought, oh wow, this is a little neat twist here. You know, you can see the injuries have all had, and is this sort of transitioning at the same time? But then they go and do the whole hallucinogenic thing, just kind of put an end to any goodwill that bit might have built up.
Yeah, and it's really the sort of writing yourself into a corner thing, because the police have to show up to rescue them.
Yeah. Yeah, it just again, it goes back to it tying itself in knots. Oh crap, how do we undo this? But, well, they're rescued now. That's it.
Like, there's no real character journey in this film at all. For, I suppose, Chelsea's our lead, or Jake, but there's not really a whole lot of character development for either of them. Something I did find quite funny is the way that Lance Henriksen casually reveals he's pretending to be a girl online and is flirting with Jake, so he can get lots of information. I just love the idea of Lance Henriksen sitting down there trying to come up with something saucy.
ASL.
He's like, oh, this guy killed my son with his negligence, says the father who's in the other side of the world. He's like, so I'm just going to flirt with him.
But then you've got to think of the time frame
weird.
between the lad dying at the beginning of the film and this party happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a day.
No,
It's 2 years. 2 years.
There is a title that comes up 2 years later.
Oh, it's 2 years. Sorry, I must have missed that part.
You get the funeral where the dad doesn't turn up.
Well,
And then the jump scare of the open casket. There is, by the way, open casket coffin for someone who set himself alight, immolated himself. And then it's a jump 2 years later, and this is when the father's clearly hacked the game and set up a party. And there is a callback to the architecture of La Marchande from 1990s. And he has a big box in the background that's spinning.
Yeah, that was pretty noticeable, unlike the 2 years later for me.
But what I get from this film is that, and I said this to David, it reminds me of one of the X-Files film where there's a fungus that makes you experience it's a hallucinogenic, but it knocks you out and then it starts digesting you. And this film sort of functions like that. Like pretty much everything you see after the funeral is a dream sequence. Then at the very end of the film, we have Lance Henriksen, skipping off to freedom, to victory. And then he opens the box and the Cenobites take him apart, which technically the epilogue of this film is the only true Hellraiser sequence in the movie.
That feels like it's been shoehorned into it. Oh shit, we better just confirm that this is a Hellraiser film.
And Pinhead does that shit line, was it, how is this for a wake-up call or something like that?
Yeah.
You're like in all three of these movies, I think the dialogue for Pinhead really suffers. And yet, apparently, Doug Bradley was a big part of writing the dialogue for Part 6. He got creative input into his own part.
I want to say quickly that there's dialogue that I recognized from, I think it's Hellraiser 5. So the line is, "Who I am is of no concern of yours," or something to that effect. And I'm pretty sure that is said again in Hellraiser 8, if not 7 as well, because Pinhead never really talks about himself in any of these films.
Just funny you should mention Doug Bradley having more of an involvement. Is 6 the first time we see him not as Pinhead?
Yes. We see him as the sort of the homeless man guardian of the box.
Yeah, he gives Trevor the box whilst dressed as like a new metal bass player.
Just while we're talking about that, I just want to bring up that one thing I will say about Hellraiser 7 actually is that there's a cameo by Gary J. Tunnicliffe, who appears early on in the office sequence when Carrie Whirrs come back from the crack whore den. And I can't word it any less politically correct than that. That's how they in the actual movies. So that happens. And yeah, that's Gary J. Tunnicliffe, who's been involved in the series since at least the third film, I believe. And in the next podcast, we're basically going to be talking about both films scripted by him, and number 10, Judgment, was directed by him as well, and he plays another character in that film.
I reckon with Deader, the mentality was he went, look, we need some people who can sound British. Gary J. Tunnicliffe's British. Will you appear in our movie? We got to sell that this is happening in England.
He did an admirable job.
By the way, fair play to this one. You would have absolutely no idea that this was shot in Romania, because they set it in the US and it basically looks like the US. Admittedly, most of this takes place indoors again, unlike Deader, which did show us the landscapes a bit. With Henry Cavill in this, it's interesting seeing him show up. I don't think he's got a whole lot to work with. He does have one of the better deaths with he gets a blade in the back thing, right?
So it's the hook that travels across the room, isn't it?
Yes, he's got the hook in the back. He's also got the bit where he's talking on the phone whilst receiving a blowjob. never a good idea.
Henry Cavill's multitasking.
She carries on. This could either be, depending on how you interpret it, either this is something that happens to him before the hallucinations kick in, since we know that Lance Henriksen did hang out the party himself, because we get that flashback where he just goes, I enjoyed the rest of the party. We just see him hanging out with some women, right? So the party did happen. Whether Lance Henriksen thought, I'll treat him to a blowjob off someone who, or it's just all in his head. We don't know, and I don't think anyone really knows except for Rick Bota.
It's revenge, Jim, but not as we know it. I mean, that sequence, right? I would say the two guys in this film, they receive slasher movie deaths. And as I've said about this series before in previous entries, this is not a slasher film series. But we get the one guy being decapitated by Pinhead, or at least the image of Pinhead with a meat cleaver. And Henry Cavill's character gets meat hooked and is left swinging around. And I think David's quite right, actually, with it. These are the deaths you would see in a Saw film.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. This was written with slasher in mind. I mean, even Pinhead comes across like Freddy Krueger, just popping up in front of the teens every now and then to deliver a one-liner just to creep them out, or pick them off in a different way, as you say, picking up the meat cleaver. But yeah,
I did take that as Saw, though, like Alasdair, because Saw came out in 2004. This comes out in 2005, and I reckon there's probably a bit of a response to going, well, we've got done J horror previously. What's kind of in right now? Well, this film Saw is getting some traction. Hostel would have at least been in the making of at this point, possibly even have a trailer out. And, I think this is a case of going, right, let's try and take this in more of a gore direction, since that's also being done. And that's where you've got like your kind of grotty bathroom kind of locations, minging basements and stuff, which only really works because the group are completely incapable of sticking together, even when they're at a party where they don't know anyone else, right? And potentially because you've got the shag tag thing set up, maybe that's why he's doing it, so you can split the group up. Do you guys remember shag tag nights? That's a very 90s thing, which our audience of 35 to 45-year-olds will go, yeah, shag tag nights, I remember those. Where people would go in, you wear a number, then someone writes a number on the board, and then they write their number on it, and then you go, oh, I see, and you decide if you want to speak to them.
You get to see who fancies who.
Yeah, it'd be sad when you look at the board and you don't have your number up there, and your mates do.
I can't say I ever went to anything like that. I was more of a pub guy.
On that note, I want to jump back into Hellraiser 8 and just say that there's about the party. There is the party going on in the main hallway, in the stairwell as well, health and safety. And also there's like a pub, there's a sort of room, a fine dining area where people are having whiskey. It's a bit quieter in there. And I would say this is a sequence that should be in a better film, where the boy walks in, he starts talking to people and nobody can hear him or see him. Now, just where you got a big party, a big sort of goth party happening in one room, and in the other room you've got sort of a fine dining whiskey consumption area.
You do still have a shagging couple.
I still think you've got Lance Henriksen's. He's taken a few leaves out of J.P. Monroe's book for the style of party to have, where you have conflicting tones and adjacent rooms.
But he does still have a shagging couple in that room. Like, he's got that couple who are just on the sofa, at it with each other, whilst at the same time he's saying the rest of his very fine dining.
Yeah, again, I think that's the side where it's messing with their heads, because, as you say, he's coming. Is it after? No, it's prior to his encounter with the woman. He's trying to, speak to people, and no one can hear him. That, to me, just felt like they'd lifted that straight out of Nightmare on Elm Street. It just felt like that kind of bit where each individual kid who's going to get picked off or potentially picked off has something they've got to deal with, usually something from a deep-seated fear. Here is where people don't see him. He's getting ignored. And that's what I take from this bit. And then the more he's being ignored, the more extreme the situation gets, which is when all of a sudden people are appearing in front of him, like shagging on the sofas and benches around him and so on. And I get that impression a couple of times. Again, it's with the inhaler bit as well. He's trying to take his asthma pump because is he dancing with someone, and then all of a sudden he starts getting short of breath. So
Yeah.
he just pumps. So it's only the blue one though. So I don't know why he should. He needs that one, but he drops it down the grill, which then goes to subterranean levels. So he's got to go to the foreshadowing room again to get killed, basically. But yeah,
there's certainly there's protracted sequences of this film with Lance Henriksen to explore this room of creepy memorabilia. We're going to go over to another room now, more creepy memorabilia. This just seemed to drag on for quite a while. Incidentally, there's this film cut throughout this film are outside shots of Lance Henriksen digging holes in the ground.
Yeah.
I like to imagine that's Lance Henriksen digging up all the plot holes in this story.
Again, witty banter. I think something like I was saying earlier about the group not sticking together, it's frustrating because you don't buy the bond there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the thing is, this group have had something traumatic happen in their life here. They've had a close friend who's committed suicide. And it doesn't, like, at the beginning, they do kind of explore a bit their largely irrational but very understandable guilt about all this, right? And then it's just, once we get the 2 years later jump, they don't really seem like friends in it. We don't really get much of a feel of their dynamic. We don't really get who's who here, what's each of them bringing to the table. And it's something that irritated me because a lot of these sort of slasher films, they do function like ensembles, where we do get to know the group. We're gutted when one of them dies because we know that they're upset when each other dies. Here, they don't have it. People generally don't know that weird shit's happening until they themselves are dying or being threatened. And it just sort of felt like such a core part not to do, because instead, Bota seemed to want to do these kind of music video sequences, these, as you said, protracted sequences. Also, by the way, something that would have been cool that they didn't do, and I don't know why, is at the party, rather than trying to make it all sexy, it would have been better if the people were all dressed as Cenobites.
Yeah, I mean, they've had, as I said earlier, they've got merch, they've got costumes, all that sort of thing.
There was a Chatterer mask.
Yeah, so...
But like, if you went into like a room where you've got several pinheads, several Chatterers, then that would be like the Bota ethos, because you wouldn't know what's real here.
Yeah, I mean, like, when Chelsea answers the door to Henry Cavill's character at the beginning of the film, he's wearing a Chatterer mask. You think, all right, we're getting there straight away, and then it turns out.
But you don't go like the Chatterers just showing up in student halls.
But yeah, I mean, like, it could quite easily have just been a load of excited teens there. They've been invited to this party, so they're going to wear the costumes based on this thing they're all spending their lives being excited about, for a start.
If I was going to make an argument, I think they maybe didn't do that so that when the Cenobites did appear, the audience knows that these are the real ones, because we are in now the films where, even though the Cenobite Angelique should be appearing in all these films at this point, she isn't, but we're getting different Cenobites per movie. So if you have the people in the party dressing up as Cenobites, and then real Cenobites showing up, but because we're using different Cenobites per movie now, the audience aren't going to know which one's which, or what's real or not, which is a very real problem in the Bota films. So I think that's why they kept the look of the Cenobites just to the Cenobites and not have anyone outside of that mask sequence, that false jump scare. They kept a lid on that.
There's another part that just utterly baffled me. It's towards the end where things are starting to unravel. We're not quite revealed that they're all buried underground and hallucinating collectively, but Chelsea, just out of nowhere, spinning back kicks Lance Henriksen off the balcony.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just thought, fucking Scott Adkins just appear for 5 seconds or something. Just I know she.
It's a dream sequence at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But prior
It
to
smacks
that,
very much of the two
What?
kickboxing cowboys from Five.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So, has anyone else got anything else to say about this before we rate it?
Well, I can't remember if it was Pinhead or Lance Henriksen's character said, "It's like a bad horror movie."
Yep.
Do you think that was to try and add a bit
Yeah.
of cheeky,
Meta.
nudge, nudge, wink, wink, fourth wall breaking? We know this is actually shit, so if we mention it's shit, it might be a little more fun.
Yeah, because it strikes me as if you're going to be including that line of a film, you've got to have a good film to be able to justify it. It's like the hubris of, you guys see X-Men Apocalypse, where they got the bit where they're leaving the cinema, they've just seen Return of the Jedi, right? And one of them turns around to the others and goes, "Yeah, that wasn't much cop." And the other one goes, "Part threes are always the worst," right? And you're going, okay, this is the worst film in its own trilogy with Days of Future Past and First Class. And it just looks silly now.
Is where I come in, and contrarian as usual, and say I actually really enjoyed Apocalypse.
Mavericks.
Makes you unique, I guess.
It's not always useful.
Wasn't too fan of it myself.
Let's see how mavericky you are in this one. Let's do the star ratings. Myself, it's probably surprised nobody, I give this one a 1 star. The series low point is only uphill from here. At least I hope it is. Maybe the rewatch will spoil either Revelations or Judgment for me. I mean, we're not talking about... Revelations is not, from memory, a fantastic movie either. But at the same time, this is the low point of the series for me. I think it's 1 star. I think it's directionless. It's repetitive. And the fact that we're in the third of Bota's offerings and he still has largely the same flaws that he's just had with the previous 2 movies, it's just a less interesting movie. I hated this one. What about you, Alistair?
Yeah, I'm going to be the same. I think 1 star. I think we'll agree on this film. It's just lacking the oomph and any life or what you'd want to expect from a Hellraiser film. It's got that sort of teeny bopper quality to it of kids messing around. They go into someone's house and they keep going into what looks like should be locked rooms and just messing around with stuff, and they keep getting all these nits and injuries, but these are meant to be hallucinogenic stuff. It makes no sense really when you really start picking apart what's meant to be happening here. And I mean, over 90% of this film is stuff just done because it looks good in the moment. And plot-wise, it doesn't hold together at all.
No, yeah, this is definitely the weakest entry. What do you think, Jim? You can agree with us? 1 star?
I'm actually going to give it a 2. Yeah, it's terrible. It's a mess. It ties itself up in knots. But some of the performances are good. Henry Cavill was pretty good in this, and I was just as good looking when, back in 2005, we're the same age. I've obviously aged a little worse than he has. But yeah, I didn't enjoy it. The plot pissed me off. The reveal was terrible.
Yeah.
But some of it I thought was pretty good. I can't give it a 1. The 2 stars is justifiable.
As well, this one split the group. Now, interesting you mentioned Henry Cavill, because we're coming up to our list. Well, everyone, Hellworld had a youthful Henry Cavill appearing in it, but he's not the first huge actor to have appeared in a horror movie early on in their careers. I have taken a list from yardbarker.com of actors who appeared in horror films in like some early career roles. Now there's quite a lot of them here. They have 19, and I've added 3 of them that they have not mentioned. So let's get some names here. This isn't in any particular order here. What do we reckon?
I'm going to say Leonardo DiCaprio, and the film it's Critters. It's one of the sequels. I think it's 4.
You are right about
3.
DiCaprio. Yep, Critters number 3.
Yep.
There was someone famous in Critters 4, if anyone remembers.
No.
Was that, wait a minute. Was it the guy that grew up into? Was he in the Austin Powers films as the son of Dr. Evil?
Seth
Do you know who I'm
Green.
talking about?
Seth Green.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't a guy who appeared in that one. No, it's Angela Bassett appears in Critters 4.
No
She's
way.
not on the list. Who else made early career appearances?
Isn't it common knowledge that both Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston were in Leprechaun movies? I don't know if it was the same one.
I think it was
Brad Pitt
just
wasn't.
Jennifer Aniston.
Yep, Jennifer Aniston makes a list of Leprechaun number 1. Brad Pitt does not make the list, but should. He was in another horror film. Does anyone know what that was called?
No.
No.
Cutting Class was an early
no.
career one for Brad Pitt. Who else has appeared in these?
Paul Rudd was in Halloween 6, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Paul Rudd, Halloween 6.
Oh,
One of them is a Hellraiser film.
I know, and I'm kicking myself because I can't remember.
It was part 4. We had ourselves a famous actor appearing in Hellraiser Part 4. That was, of course, Adam Scott.
Yes, because I even mentioned that when we talked about it.
Now, we've got one of the world's biggest actors, now a director. He is most famous for playing... well, he's not most famous for playing Batman, but he did play Batman and badly.
George Clooney.
Yep, George Clooney appeared in Return to Horror High and Return of the Killer Tomatoes.
I was going to say Val Kilmer then, because I actually prefer Batman and Robin to Batman Forever, but carry on.
They're both pretty bad films, those two.
Who gets killed by Jason in the first? Well, not killed by Jason. Jason's mum in the first Friday the 13th film. Yeah, Kevin Bacon makes the list.
It's an arrow through the throat.
Yeah, and of
I bet
course
that would have loosened his foot.
groan. And next, one of the most famous slasher films of all time, a career starter for someone.
Johnny Depp.
That's not the one I was thinking of, but yeah,
okay.
he's on the list as well.
Thinking of Jamie Lee Curtis?
Yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis, of course, of Halloween. Johnny Depp does make the list, and so does another actor who appeared in Nightmare on Elm Street. This was, well, actually, in one of the sequels, this was Patricia Arquette appears in Elm Street Part 4. And interestingly, I think it's Part 4, maybe it's Part 3.
I think she was in the third one as well. I think she was in both.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
both films.
I think it was 3. Yeah, Lawrence Fishburne also appears in Elm Street 3. He's not on the list, and it's probably because he already had a bit of a career before then. Like he'd already appeared in Apocalypse Now, for instance. What else would you think makes this list? I can tell you, Tom Hanks is on this. Do you know what his horror film was?
Was there? There was one called Mazes and Monsters.
The Burbs.
You know, it wasn't actually either of those. He's in He Knows You're Alone was the one he was in, which is a stalker film.
How does he know I'm alone?
We also have Renée Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey. What did they appear in together?
Oh, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation.
Yeah, sorry, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: Next Generation, Part 4, which I believe had a different shooting name. I think it's going to be called something like Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I'm glad they didn't go with. Julia Louis-Dreyfus appeared in a fairly bad movie, which is better known for having a very bad sequel. Going to give you guys a clue. Oh no, they're eating him, and next they're going to eat me.
Troll.
Yeah, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is in Troll, and also her Seinfeld co-host.
I was just going to say that would lead it into The Burning, which has got an ageless Jason Alexander in it. He looks exactly the same in that film playing a teenager as he does playing George in Seinfeld.
It's not a particularly flattering thing. He hasn't aged. You go, yeah, he aged badly at the beginning.
but then flatlined age-wise.
Now, we've got another person appears in the Friday the 13th film. My personal favourite Friday the 13th, Part 4. This features, does anyone know?
Is it one of the Coreys?
No, it's the actor Crispin Glover appears in it, where he's best known for being the dead fuck character as he gets nicknamed and does some amazing dancing. We have Michelle Williams as well, who appeared in Species and Halloween H2O. Now, Charlize Theron, do you know what she appeared in?
I'm afraid not.
Charlize Theron appeared in Children of the Corn Part 3.
I was so hoping you were going to say Prometheus.
And get this, Eva Mendes appears in Children of the Corn Part 5. Plus Urban Legends.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we're down to the last few people here. Hilary Swank. Anyone know her film?
Oh, the Karate Kid. The next Karate Kid. That was terrifying.
No. I'll give you a clue. It became a very big TV series known for having Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Oh,
Buffy.
Yeah. She appeared in the hit movie Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, Patrick Dempsey. Patrick Dempsey appeared in a film called The Stuff, which I've never watched. And Elizabeth Olsen. Now, this is a really good movie she appeared in, which was Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene. I absolutely loved that film. Really eerie. A good film about someone recovering from life in a cult. So think of it as being like an unfunny version, or in fact, an even more unfunny version of The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And she also appeared in The Silent House as well, which is a pretty decent one-shot horror film. It was a remake. I can't mind where the original one is from. Now, there's a couple of other actors who were not mentioned there. Rooney Mara had a very small cameo in Urban Legends Bloody Mary. And Seth Rogen has a very brief cameo in Donnie Darko. So there you go. It's not only Henry Cavill who became huge after having a horror film in their back catalogue.
It almost seems like starring in a horror film early on is a rite of passage.
Yeah,
What you didn't
absolutely.
mention there was Wind Chill, that starred Emily Blunt.
Oh, that was a really good movie as well, actually. Yeah,
it
that was
wasn't bad.
very early in her career too. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, everyone should do horror films.
At least one.
Folks, this has been probably the longest, most authoritative episode of any podcast on Hellraiser Part 6
Yeah.
I hope Bota's just like he's sitting there with a wee whiskey, remembering all the good times on set, thinking like, yeah, the train. Oh, if only he knew about the cock rate for the extras. You know?
Apparently, just as a bit of a, because I did go on IMDb and check out a few of the background details, and in the DVD commentary, Rick Bota does refer to the $10,000 extra. Now, apparently, the rule was that Rick Bota, as the director, was not allowed to give direct instructions to non-speaking extras. It had to go through the assistant director. But they shot a scene, and Rick Bota told one extra what he had to do differently. And yeah, that extra claimed the fee.
Oh, wow. I'd never heard of that. That's crazy. I never heard of
It
the idea
is
of a director not being able to speak to
It's a
extras.
strange rule, but you can. It's online. You can check it out. The $10,000 extra probably earned more money than much of the main cast.
Did he have his dick out?
That was Bota's direct instruction. Didn't you tell me about Ashley Lawrence, about her fee? That's like depressing as hell.
Now this got even more depressing. I did check this out, and apparently I don't think she enjoyed her time on this film, because as you said, she didn't want to promote the film or put any effort in that way.
Yeah, refused to do it for Fangoria when they asked, and she was like,
Yeah.
"Nah."
Now I read somewhere that basically her fee was so little that all she could get with it was enough to purchase a fridge freezer. However, on double checking this detail, I realized that she only earned enough to make one payment on the fridge freezer that she had bought.
She'd have got more as she appeared on Bullseye. There's again our audience of 35 to 45-year-old men going, fucking yes. Maybe we'll mention SodaStream in the next episode.
I'm sure our audience
Peter Kay
consists
sitting
of
there
more
getting
than that.
jokes.
Yeah. I think we've got quite a broad audience. I think, are you talking about just the most likely, the general audience?
Oh yeah. Apparently, it's a good 50 to 60% of our listeners. We have 3% of our listeners are, I believe, based in the Czech Republic. So hello to Czech Republic. Yeah, I love that country. I've been there many times. Prague, great city. Anyway, Jim, as a person who's new to this series, how are you feeling about having 2 more of these to watch?
Well, if Hellworld is as bad as it gets, then you can only be looking up, can't it? You did mention that I believe one of these is Clive Barker's least favourite and had some very unpleasant words to say about it. So I'm looking forward to it, maybe.
Yeah, I believe he said that he's shat out
one.
better things.
That was it,
It's,
yes.
it's
yes.
revelations. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, and I still feel this rewatching it, while the quality of a lot of these movies is quite questionable, unlike Part 7, I do think the series is better than the sum of its parts. You know, there's still something quite enjoyable about the concept of it. Even in the lesser films, I like seeing Cenobites. You know, I like the idea of this box that can open a dimension, portal to hell. And while you do get worse ones, I think the films seem worse because you're comparing them to other ones in the series. With Part 7, if you're just watching a film that's based around someone trying to open a dimension to hell and they're going to get their army to fight it or whatever, I think that it still seemed like quite a cool idea. Whereas because we've seen 6 other films beforehand and the idea has sort of lost its novelty. But there's something about this property that fundamentally works for me.
Yeah, 8 aside, they've managed to keep going. Yeah, the quality dips dramatically. But they've kept it going and they've kept it sincere. They haven't gone the same route as, say, A Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th, where the more they do, the more they realize it's silly and they kind of go down a bit of a goofy route with that. And granted, I can watch any Nightmare on Elm Street film and have a good time. And I guess it's the same with the Hellraiser ones as well. I'm enjoying them. Yeah, the last couple really dipped in quality, but overall, it's been an enjoyable experience.
And Alasdair, as a person who's been a fan for the longest, because you've been a fan since around about 2000 when the 5th was coming out. Like, how did you feel when did you keep a track of these as they got released?
Kind of, yeah. Like every time I hear of a new Hellraiser film, I can't wait to hear it. I can't wait to see it, I should say. And, you know, it's always that sort of treat to know there's another Hellraiser film coming. I suppose it brings me back to when I watched the first film on Channel 4, and then a week later there was the second installment, because they did a series of every Friday night. They showed late night Friday night another Hellraiser film, and at a very pleasant surprise, I thought it was just a trilogy. 4th week, I thought I'll stay up late, just see what happens, turn it on to Channel 4, and then bam, there's another Hellraiser film, Hellraiser 4. So I was just pleasantly surprised with that. And I think it reminds me of that anticipation of waiting for some entertainment to come. And obviously, I think those first 4 films are superior to what came after. But I mean, the Hellraiser films I enjoy, and there's such scope for imagination and ideas there. And with, I think, the Rick Bota trilogy that we're covering tonight, it doesn't quite, fully manifest. It doesn't. I mean, the one biggest complaint about all 3 of these films is essentially missed potential. And there's a lot of missed potential in all 3 of these films. But there's still something in there that you could see what it could have been. I mean, it's not like the Halloween franchise, which is different timelines, or some sequels ignore previous sequels. Some movie franchises are now quite convoluted. The Hellraiser one, for 10 entries, it doesn't actually done that. There's even the bad ones that we're talking about tonight. They're canon. You can't. They're not bad enough where they've actually, like, a sequel has to now try and explain away that one or anything. And I always think, really creatively, there's a slight problem, I think, with the Hellraiser franchise, in that someone needs to play with the box to open it to get the pinheads to show up. And in many ways, it's kind of like Jurassic Park, in the sense that the dinosaurs are in cages. The dinosaurs have to get out of the cages for stuff to happen at some point. And first film, we had a man who, for profit, shut down parts of the park to make out with embryos for the money that he wanted. That was the most realistic means by which, or the best reason that dinosaurs would escape from their cages and start eating people. Every single time you do a sequel, you can't use the same reason the dinosaurs escape again and again. But then your reasons for letting the dinosaurs get out are going to get more and more contrived. I think in the most recent one, there was one of the head-butting dinosaurs managed to power its way out a brick wall and everyone just followed, which I think was perhaps the lamest escape of all. And it's Hellraiser, for the potential pitfalls of having it, is the villains in this series have to be summoned. And there's never one where it's like, that's a bad reason for summoning the Cenobites. It's not quite fallen into the pitfalls that it could have.
Yeah, I think what this has got over Jurassic Park, I suppose, if you're comparing the two, is that Jurassic Park would no doubt be an international incident, whereas Hellraiser, who's going to believe a person that a demon came out of a box? So that's something you can run with for as many films as you like and make your own new continuity for it. And it doesn't necessarily have to tie up with anything that's come previous.
I think another parallel here is with Jaws, where you have to be in the sea for the shark to get you. So, like, unless you have inadequate mayors opening beaches all the time. I think there's a difficulty with how you shoehorn this back into a plot. Now, with these ones here, I think Bota's just a bit... he's almost a bit too modest in terms of, like, what he thinks the audience will let characters away with, right? Because in the first movie, you got this power play going on with Julia, who's essentially trying to kill people to bring back her deceased lover. How good a fucker this guy must be for her to want to bring him back in corpse form and kill people. But the thing is, as the audience, we're in on this. We know we're part of the caper, and we sort of let her away with this because we want to see what happens. Whereas it frustrates me that 6, 7, 8 are all about discovering a backing story that's just not really that interesting.
Yeah.
And like the thing is with Hellraiser, we want to see people do relatively horrible things because that's the series we signed up for. It's about the kind of the darker parts of humanity, I guess. And then it becomes like these sort of psychological thrillers instead of films that are exploring particular sins and particular vices.
Yeah.
Well, I think with all the best horrors, it's style and substance. And the first Hellraiser film, even 2 and 3 had that in spades, in my opinion. And, slowly as the series progresses, it just gets less and less on the substance side of things.
Folks, just like the director Rick Bota, because you mentioned these films already, I fear that we're beginning to tread over familiar territory. So gonna call an end to this one, but do join us as the journey ends with revelations and judgment. I'm personally really excited about seeing these two again and completing the first mini-series for the Horror Cult Films podcast. So hope to see you guys there again. For now, it's a goodbye from me and a goodbye from these guys.
See you later.
All right, bye.
News, views, and reviews, check out HorrorCultFilms.co.uk. Music by White Bat Audio.